Black Ridge Federal Penitentiary was said to be inescapable, a fortress for the worst of the worst. No one had ever broken out. No one ever would. At least, that's what they believed. They thought they had buried him, a soldier framed for a crime he didn't commit, locked away to die. The men who set him up thought their secret was safe, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. He watched, he learned, and when the alarms blared and the walls burned, he disappeared. Now, he's on the run, hunted by mercenaries, bounty hunters, and federal agents. Every step brings him closer to the truth, the proof that can clear his name and bring down the ones who put him there. He has one shot at justice, and he won't stop until the real criminals take his place behind bars. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The cold steel walls of Blackwood Federal Detention Facility loomed like an unbreakable fortress against the night sky, their towering presence a silent warning to anyone inside. No one escaped, not in 100 years, not without leaving in a body bag. Deep within the labyrinth of high-security cells, Logan Pierce sat in the suffocating silence of solitary confinement, his wrists shackled to the steel table before him. The dim overhead light flickered, casting his sharp, calculating features into half-shadow. A decade of service as a Navy SEAL had conditioned his body into something sculpted for endurance, but now the weight of imprisonment threatened to dull even the sharpest edge. Except he wasn't broken. His mind was still a weapon, honed and primed, processing everything. The guard rotations, the security blind spots, the sound of heavy boots echoing against concrete floors at precise intervals. He had spent the past 6 months mapping the rhythm of this place, dissecting its weaknesses like an enemy combatant. Because this was a battlefield. And he didn't plan on dying in enemy hands. A muffled voice echoed down the hallway, just past his cell. Waste of resources. Keeping him here. They'll be rid of him soon enough. Yeah, another voice responded. Just needs to look like an accident. Logan's breath stilled. His eyes remained locked forward, his heartbeat steady, controlled. So it was confirmed. He wasn't meant to serve a life sentence. He was meant to be erased. They weren't going to let him live long enough to fight the conviction. The evidence that put him here, fabricated. The so-called witnesses disappeared. He had suspected it before, but now, hearing the confirmation from the very men who were supposed to guard him, that changed everything. He had no more time. That night, under the constant hum of surveillance cameras and the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, Logan Pierce made a choice. His escape plan, meticulously crafted over months, was no longer an idea. It was a mission to break out, uncover the conspiracy that framed him, and hunt down the men who wanted him dead, and he would not fail. Logan Pierce lay on the stiff, narrow cot in his cell, his eyes fixed on the dull concrete ceiling above him, his breath slow, steady, controlled. He had memorized every detail of this room, from the barely noticeable crack in the farthest wall to the way the flickering light bulb in the corner hummed at a precise, rhythmic interval. Every corner, every nuance, every weakness. He had studied them all. Because in a place like Blackwood Federal Detention Facility, where escape was considered an impossibility, every unnoticed flaw was an opportunity. The guards believed they had broken him, that months of solitary confinement, constant surveillance, and the knowledge of his impending execution had drained the fight from his body, dulled the edge that once made him one of the deadliest operatives in the field. But what they failed to understand was that silence did not mean surrender. Stillness did not mean weakness. The truth was, every second he had spent locked away had been used to prepare for this moment. He shifted just slightly, his fingers brushing against the seam of his prison uniform, where a thin strip of sharpened metal, a piece of wiring he had painstakingly pried from the underside of his cot over several weeks, lay hidden in the fabric. It was crude, barely the length of his palm, but it would serve its purpose. Every soldier knew the value of a weapon, no matter how small. His time was running out. The conversation he had overheard made that clear. Whatever arrangement had been made to erase him would be carried out soon. And once it happened, no one would question it. The world had already accepted the carefully constructed lie that branded him a traitor, a murderer, a disgrace to the uniform he had spent his life serving. He would not wait for them to finish the job. The plan had been built in layers, each step calculated down to the last second. It had taken weeks to account for all the variables, shift rotations, security blind spots, and the exact time the facility's systems ran their routine maintenance cycle. A place like Blackwood ran on precision. Every aspect of its operation was timed to the millisecond, which meant that if one thing changed, even by a fraction, it created a ripple effect. And a ripple was all Logan needed. That ripple would come at exactly 02:37 a.m., when the facility's automated security system momentarily rebooted, causing a 3-second blind spot in the surveillance feeds. 3 seconds wasn't enough for most men, but Logan wasn't most men. He would start with the door. The lock was electronic, but the cell itself had been designed with outdated emergency mechanisms in case of power failure. Manual override levers hidden behind the paneling in the back of the cell. Prisoners weren't supposed to know they existed, and even if they did, it would take a steady hand and a trained touch to exploit them without setting off the internal alarms. Logan had spent 3 weeks feeling for the exact pressure points behind the panel, learning the precise amount of force it would take to trigger the manual release. The door was only the first step. From there, he would have 7 minutes before the next patrol passed through his block. The timing had to be flawless. He had prepared distractions, subtle enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but disruptive enough to slow the guards down just enough. A slow-burning chemical compound, made from substances he'd smuggled from the prison's maintenance wing, would be igniting 2 floors above, causing smoke to trigger the fire alarms in a section far from his planned route. The facility was built to contain riots, not fires. The response team would be deployed immediately, diverting security personnel away from the lower levels where he would be moving. The next challenge would be the motion detectors. They were placed in the hallways leading to the high-security wing, designed to pick up even the slightest movement. But Logan had observed a crucial flaw. The guards who passed through daily carried a frequency chip that temporarily disabled the sensors as they walked. It was a safeguard to prevent them from triggering their own alarms, a lazy design oversight that Logan had been counting on. The only thing he needed was a way to get his hands on one of those chips, and that part of the plan was already in motion. He had made sure that tonight, during shift change, one particular guard would come through this block. Officer Royce Carter, careless, arrogant, and predictable. He was the kind of man who didn't take his job seriously, who walked his rounds with the overconfidence of someone who believed nothing could go wrong, and that overconfidence would be his mistake. Logan would take the chip, slip past the motion detectors, and make his way to the maintenance wing, where a ventilation shaft led directly to the lower perimeter wall. Security cameras covered every exit, but Logan knew something the facility's designers hadn't accounted for. The ventilation system wasn't designed to carry weight, but water access tunnels, built beneath the foundation to allow drainage from the facility's underground levels, could. They weren't designed for prisoners, but neither was Logan. And then there was the final obstacle, the outer perimeter, where the guard towers and floodlights scanned for movement. The walls of Blackwood were nearly 30 feet high, topped with razor wire, and monitored by infrared sensors designed to detect heat signatures. That was the part of the plan Logan had yet to solve. It was a risk, but he would have to take it. At exactly 2:36 a.m., the facility's lights flickered as the security systems began their reboot cycle. The automated locks on the cell doors made a quiet mechanical sound as they briefly disengaged before re-engaging a second later. Logan reached for the hidden panel behind his cot, fingers pressing against the seam where he had mapped out the emergency override switch. A breath, a precise shift of pressure. A nearly silent click. The lock on his door released. Logan stepped forward, pressing his back against the cold steel wall as he listened to the corridor outside, waiting for the exact moment. A shadow moved past the reinforced glass of his cell door, the heavy thud of boots echoing in the silence. Royce Carter. Right on schedule. It was time. Logan had 7 minutes to disappear. 7 minutes before the alarms sounded. 7 minutes before the facility realized that the most dangerous man they had ever locked away was no longer in his cell. And by the time they did, it would already be too late. Logan had 7 minutes to disappear. 7 minutes before the alarms sounded. 7 minutes before the facility realized that the most dangerous man they had ever locked away was no longer in his cell. And by the time they did, it would already be too late. His movements were precise, controlled, executed with the kind of discipline that only came from years of training in the field. Every step was calculated, every action deliberate. There was no room for hesitation, no margin for error. He pressed himself into the shadows, his breath steady as he tracked the familiar sound of Royce Carter's footsteps fading down the corridor. He had timed it perfectly. Carter wasn't just careless. He was predictable. He always walked his route the same way, passing by Logan's cell first, before continuing down to the checkpoint at the far end of the block, where he would waste a full 30 seconds leaning against the security desk, chatting with the other officers. 30 seconds was all Logan needed. He moved. Slipping through the open door, he hugged the wall as he stalked silently behind Carter, his approach undetectable even in the echoing corridor. In one swift motion, he wrapped his arm around the guard's throat, cutting off his air before he could make a sound. Carter struggled, his fingers clawing uselessly at Logan's forearm, his body jerking in a desperate attempt to free himself. It took precisely 3 seconds for Carter to go limp, his body slumping into unconsciousness. Logan dragged him into a nearby janitorial closet, ensuring the door was locked from the inside before unhooking the guard's keycard and frequency chip from his belt. The chip was the real prize. It was what allowed Carter to move past the motion-activated security sensors without triggering an alarm. Without it, Logan wouldn't get more than 10 feet before being detected. Step 1. Complete. Now came the real challenge. He had planned for every contingency, but distractions weren't just about making noise. They had to be strategic. If the guards caught wind of an escape too soon, the facility would go into full lockdown, shutting off every possible exit. But if they were dealing with a separate emergency, something urgent enough to divert resources away from their patrols, it would buy Logan the time he needed. That was why Cell Block D, 2 floors above, had been chosen as his point of disruption. It was older, its fire suppression system still linked to the prison's central security grid. If a fire alarm triggered there, it would automatically lock down that block and reroute security teams, forcing the prison's response unit to investigate. For weeks, Logan had been collecting small amounts of cleaning chemicals, carefully scraping residue from industrial solvents used by the janitorial staff. He had smuggled them away drop by drop, hiding them in a small plastic pouch he had sewn into the lining of his mattress. The mixture wasn't explosive, but it was highly flammable, designed to ignite on contact with extreme heat, producing a dense, thick smoke, enough to set off the alarms, but not enough to cause real damage. He had passed the chemical pouch to an inmate in Block D earlier that day, slipping it through a loose brick slot in the recreation yard during his transport from solitary confinement. It was a trade, a favor Logan had earned weeks ago when he stopped the man from being killed in a fight. The instructions were simple. Break the pouch at exactly 02:38 a.m., just near the ventilation duct in the shower area, where the rising steam would help carry the smoke directly into the detectors. 02:38 a.m. The fire alarms blared through the facility, a shrill, piercing wail that sent an immediate shockwave through the upper levels. Red warning lights flashed across the prison's control panels, And within seconds, Logan heard the sound of guards shouting over the radio, their voices overlapping in a frantic mess of static and confusion. "Block D, we've got smoke! Status report! Sprinklers just activated! Prisoners are agitated! All available units, respond to cell Block D now!" Exactly as planned. Logan wasted no time. With the fire alarm in place, he moved toward the security door leading to the maintenance wing, swiping Carter's stolen keycard across the reader. A small flicker of red, then green. The door unlocked with a soft mechanical click, and he slipped inside, shutting it silently behind him. The maintenance wing was different from the rest of the prison. Darker, quieter. The walls lined with rusted pipes and exposed electrical conduits. It smelled of oil and stagnant water, the distant hum of industrial generators vibrating through the floors beneath his boots. No cameras, no guards, just the water access tunnels, exactly where he needed to go. He reached the end of the corridor, where a heavy steel grate covered the drainage tunnel leading beneath the outer perimeter wall. The bolts were old, rusted, weakened over time, not by accident, but because Logan had spent weeks loosening them whenever he was brought through on cleaning duty. He crouched low, retrieving the sharpened wire he had hidden inside the seam of his uniform, wedging it beneath the last stubborn bolt. A slow, forceful press. The metal groaned. Then, a snap. The grate shifted loose. Logan exhaled, steadying himself before slipping into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing him whole. The tunnel was tight, damp, and suffocating, the scent of rust and stagnant water thick in the air. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, his movements slow, precise, his breathing controlled. Every second counted. If he lost track of time, if he took a wrong turn, he could end up stuck in this pit, suffocating in silence, before anyone even knew he was gone. The tunnel sloped downward before leveling out, leading toward the vertical maintenance shaft he had studied for months. He reached up, fingers searching in the dark until they found the steel rungs embedded in the concrete wall. He began to climb. At the top, past the grate covering the exit, the outer perimeter fence loomed just beyond. The floodlights moved in slow, rhythmic sweeps, scanning the ground. The external sensors were heat-sensitive, designed to detect anything not wearing an approved transponder. He had accounted for this. He waited, tracking the motion of the lights, his muscles tensed like a coiled spring. Then, the window. He pushed the grate open, slow, controlled, sliding through just as the light swept past him. The wind hit him, sharp and cold, but he didn't stop. He dropped into the grass, rolling beneath the drainage pipe that extended along the perimeter fence. The floodlights swept back. Stopped. Logan froze. A pause. Then the light moved on. He exhaled. 02:46 a.m. He moved fast, reaching the power grid's maintenance ladder, the one weakness in the perimeter wall. No one had ever used it before. Until now, he climbed. The charge from the power conduit could kill him instantly if he slipped, but he wasn't touching the cables. Only the insulated steel beams supporting them. Shimmy. Move! Don't look down. When he reached the other side, he let go. The moment his boots hit the ground, he was outside the prison walls. Behind him, the alarms screamed. Guards scrambled, their radios crackling as they tried to piece together what had happened. But Logan was already gone. He disappeared into the tree line, the darkness swallowing him whole. 02:50 a.m. Logan Pierce was free. For now. Logan ran. He ran like the wind tearing through the thick, suffocating darkness of the forest, his breath controlled but deep, his muscles burning as the adrenaline coursed through his veins. Every movement was calculated, every step placed with precision, silent where it needed to be, forceful where speed mattered more than stealth. The prison alarms still echoed in the distance, a wailing chorus that told him exactly what he had anticipated. They had discovered his absence, but they were behind. He could hear the chaos unfolding in his mind as clearly as if he were standing inside the control room, watching the guards scramble. The confusion would spread first. Voices shouting over radios, overlapping, clashing, all of them trying to make sense of how a man had disappeared from what was supposed to be an inescapable fortress. Then came the overcorrection, the lockdown orders, the rushed sweeps of the perimeter. Exactly what he had counted on. They would waste time checking the wrong places first, assuming he was still somewhere within the outer fences, maybe hiding in one of the maintenance tunnels or attempting to bypass a checkpoint. But Logan was already beyond the perimeter, past the outermost barriers that separated Blackwood Federal Detention Facility from the vast, untamed wilderness beyond. It was the wild now. The rules had changed. And while the bounty hunters and elite trackers they were about to send after him would be formidable, this terrain was his domain. His mind ran faster than his body, processing 100 variables at once. 3 minutes before aerial surveillance is deployed, 5 before thermal imaging starts sweeping the woods, 10 before the first wave of pursuit teams hit the tree line. He needed distance. He needed cover. He needed fire breaks, places where he could obscure his trail, disrupt scent tracking, force his pursuers to hesitate. He pushed forward, his breath even despite the punishing speed. The way his body fought against exhaustion, against the chill of the night air, against the pain radiating from his shoulders where the rough descent from the power grid had left his muscles sore and bruised. He wove between the towering trees, ducking beneath low branches, his eyes scanning the landscape as he moved, assessing the incline, the density of foliage, the patterns of the undergrowth. Then, movement. A searchlight beam cut through the trees, too distant to touch him yet, but approaching fast from the north. They had mobilized the recon drones sooner than expected. He needed immediate cover. Think. Move. He veered left, spotting a dry riverbed, its walls steep and lined with jagged rocks. Not perfect, but enough to break visibility for a few minutes. He slid down, his boots skidding against loose gravel before he hit the bottom, pressing his back against the stone wall, inhaling sharply. The drone passed just overhead, the faint, electric hum of its engine barely audible against the distant sirens. He exhaled. One problem down. 100 more to go. His mind kept running. They will track your footprints. They will find this riverbed. You need to misdirect them. He crouched low, pressing his fingers into the damp earth, running them through the moisture, mud. Without hesitation, he smeared a layer of it across his arms, his face, his exposed skin, working fast. The heat signature would be reduced, his scent blurred. He moved again, slower now, navigating the terrain with the patience of a predator. He needed to think like the men hunting him, anticipate their methods, stay ahead. They would assume he was running straight, desperate, trying to put as much distance between himself and the prison as possible, which meant he needed to do the opposite. Instead of sprinting deeper into the forest, he doubled back at an angle, circling around a dense thicket of trees, his footfalls deliberate, stepping onto patches of loose leaves and damp soil to avoid leaving clear impressions. He was erasing his trail, making it uncertain, chaotic, unreliable. A branch snapped somewhere in the distance. Not natural. A patrol. Logan pressed himself against a tree, his breathing controlled, his heartbeat a steady, powerful rhythm against his ribs. A voice. Radio static. Negative contact. Still scanning south perimeter. Thermal's not picking anything up. He's masking it. Stay on the grid. He couldn't have gone far. They were close. Too close. Logan moved carefully, staying low, shifting through the undergrowth. Every fiber of his being screamed to keep running, to push forward. But instinct told him to wait, to listen. He crouched behind the base of a fallen log, his fingers gripping the rough bark. His mind talked to itself, working through the strategy, reminding him of every lesson, every scenario, every escape tactic drilled into him over the years. You have 3 choices. Keep running, engage, or misdirect. You don't run until you have an exit path. You don't fight unless you have the upper hand, which means the only option is to control what they see. His gaze flicked to the low-hanging tree branches above, thick with tangled limbs. A natural choke point. If he could maneuver them into that area, cut across the stream bed, and double back before they realized, a sharp beep cut through the night. One of the patrols activated a tracker. Infrared, motion sensitive. They were switching tactics. His hands clenched into fists. They weren't just following his trail anymore. They were predicting his movement. Good. That meant they had underestimated him. A slow breath, a decision made. He shifted backward, placing a false footprint in the mud, angled toward the ridge, then doubled back the other way, retracing his steps carefully to ensure the false trail remained intact. He grabbed a handful of damp leaves, pressed them against the fresh mark, ensuring it looked like he had moved that way before vanishing into the trees. Now, they had two trails to follow, and they would have to guess which one was real. A risk, but a calculated one. He took one last look at the patrol's position, his eyes scanning the trees, the movement of shadows, the direction of their searchlights. Then he moved, quick, silent, slipping through the undergrowth as the voices behind him grew more distant. 5 minutes. That was how long they would waste checking the false path. 5 minutes to disappear completely. 5 minutes before they realized that Logan Pierce was already beyond their reach. He moved like a shadow through the dense wilderness, his breath steady despite the punishing pace, his boots barely making a sound against the damp forest floor. His body was pushed to its limit, muscles burning from the relentless sprint through uneven terrain. But he didn't slow. There was no room for weakness, no space for hesitation. They would be closing in soon. The forest was his only ally now. The towering trees stretching high above him, their tangled branches blocking out the moonlight, casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. He kept to those shadows, moving between them with the same precision he had once used to stalk his enemies in combat. But then, voices, sharp, close, too close. Logan came to an abrupt stop, pressing himself against the thick trunk of an ancient pine, forcing his breathing to slow. He couldn't have gotten far. "You check left. I'll move toward the ridge. If we don't find him in the next 5 minutes, we radio in." Logan's jaw clenched. They were ahead of schedule. He had counted on standard search tactics, on delayed coordination between the pursuit teams. But these two, whoever they were, had moved faster than he expected. They had cut him off instead of following behind, which meant his window of escape had just slammed shut. Carefully he turned his head, scanning through the thick foliage. He spotted them almost immediately. 2 men, black tactical gear, no prison insignia. These weren't standard guards. They were contractors, men who had been called in the moment his breakout had been confirmed. And that meant they had been given one order only: stop him at all costs. One of them was moving toward the ridge, sweeping his flashlight across the trees, slow, methodical. The other was closer, dangerously close, his rifle slung across his back, his hand resting on the radio clipped to his vest. If that radio made a sound, if the guard had even a second to call in his position, everything was over. Logan didn't think. He moved, silent, deadly. He closed the distance in a blur, his muscles coiled like a spring, his body shifting with practiced efficiency. 1 step, 2, 3. Before the guard could react, Logan's arm wrapped around his throat from behind, pulling him into the shadows with a single, brutal motion. The man stiffened immediately, his body jerking as he realized what was happening. He reached up, clawing at Logan's forearm, his boots scraping against the dirt as he struggled. Logan's grip was unyielding, his forearm pressing against the man's windpipe, cutting off his air. The fight was instant, violent, desperate. The guard was strong, stronger than Logan had anticipated. He thrashed, his arms flailing, trying to leverage his weight to break free. But Logan had the advantage. He kept his stance wide, his grip unshakable, his body pressed against the man's back, limiting movement. Then, The guard's hand shot toward his vest. Logan's eyes flicked downward just in time to see the man's fingers stretching toward his radio, toward the emergency call button on his phone. No. Logan tightened his grip, his muscles straining as he adjusted his hold, shifting his weight to drive the man downward, forcing him off balance. The guard choked, his body seizing, his fingers still reaching, still fighting. He was seconds away from hitting the alarm. Logan's grip tightened further, his forearm a vice, cutting deeper into the man's windpipe. The sound that came next was horrible, a mixture of gasping, desperate, choking, the man's body spasming in protest. But still, he fought. His fingers brushed against the radio. Logan jerked him backward, harder this time, twisting his hold, driving his knee into the man's lower back to break his last attempt at resistance. The phone slipped from his grip, falling uselessly into the dirt. The guard's body convulsed one last time. Then, stillness. For a long moment, Logan held the choke, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath slow, steady, controlled. His arms ached from the sheer force of it, but he didn't let go. Not yet. He had seen men fake unconsciousness before, had fought enemies who had waited for the exact moment a hold loosened before striking back. He counted. 1, 2, 3. The body went completely limp. Only then did Logan ease his grip, lowering the guard's unconscious form carefully onto the ground, ensuring there was no noise, no movement that would alert his partner. He couldn't stay here. The second guard was still nearby, still sweeping the ridge, still waiting for a response that would never come. Logan crouched low, his body shifting back into motion, his mind already adjusting. He needed to move before the absence of radio contact raised suspicion. He turned, his eyes scanning for the next route, the next escape point, the next, "Hey, where the hell are you?" The second guard's voice cut through the night. Logan's breath slowed. The man was starting to turn back. He had seconds before the search pattern shifted, seconds before the alarm was raised, seconds before the hunt started all over again. And this time, it would be even worse. He turned, his eyes scanning for the next route, the next escape point, the next way to stay ahead. But all he caught was the sudden glare of a flashlight swinging in his direction, the harsh beam slicing through the dark undergrowth. "Hey, where the hell are you?" The second guard's voice rang out, tense and demanding, full of the same urgency that filled Logan's veins. Logan's breath slowed, the instinct to fight or flee warring within him, but the choice was already made for him. The guard had begun to turn back, focusing his light toward the downed man's last position, and Logan knew that if the guard found the body, even just found him unconscious, there would be no time left for subtlety. The entire perimeter would lock down, and more patrols would flood the forest within minutes. He had to act. With a fluid burst of speed, Logan broke from the cover of the trees, closing the distance before the guard fully registered the movement. The flashlight beam jerked wildly as the man realized someone was coming straight at him. He fumbled for his radio, his other hand gripping the rifle slung across his shoulder, but he was caught between instincts. Logan had the advantage of momentum. He batted the muzzle aside with his left forearm, forcing it away from his torso. Then he drove a hard right hook into the guard's midsection, feeling the shock of impact shudder through his knuckles. The guard staggered back, a ragged gasp escaping him as he fought to keep his balance. But he recovered quickly. Too quickly. The rifle spun around, and for a split second, Logan saw the guard's finger move toward the trigger. He had no cover. No time to dodge. Instead, he grabbed the weapon's barrel with both hands, twisting his body and leveraging his full weight to yank the rifle down. The guard lost his grip and stumbled forward, nearly colliding with Logan, but regaining just enough footing to swing a desperate punch. Logan ducked. The guard's fist whistled past his ear, close enough that he could feel the air displacement. In a single motion, Logan pivoted at the waist, slamming his shoulder into the guard's chest, hooking his foot behind the guard's ankle to send him sprawling. They both hit the ground hard, leaves and dirt scattering around them. The guard tried to twist away, his free hand clawing for the radio on his vest, but Logan was faster. He pressed his forearm against the man's wrist, pinning it to the earth, and hammered a short, precise strike against the side of the man's head. The guard's body went slack, the fight abruptly leaving his muscles as his eyes unfocused. He wasn't dead. Logan had made sure of that, careful to knock him out without crushing his skull or cutting off his air. The man sagged against the ground with a groan, his consciousness flickering into darkness. Logan grabbed the radio, flicked it off, and tossed it into the nearest patch of bushes. He paused for the briefest moment, ensuring the guard's chest was still rising and falling. No kill, just a forced nap. Then he rose to his feet, heart pounding. He knew the clock was ticking, knew more men would come searching for their missing teammates, but he had gained himself a precious window, a sliver of time to disappear further into the forest before the man roused or someone else stumbled upon them. Without a word, he slipped back into the cover of darkness, his boots treading silently over the damp earth. The thick canopy swallowed him whole, leaving the unconscious guard behind, ensuring that by the time help arrived, Logan Pierce would be long gone. Logan's breathing was still ragged when he disappeared into the endless expanse of the forest, the rustle of leaves and the hushed chorus of nocturnal creatures swallowing him up as though he had never been there at all. He slipped between tangled undergrowth and uneven terrain, his mind racing to find the next place to hide before the night dissolved into morning. The encounter with the two guards had cost him precious time, and the knowledge that more men would be scouring the forest put an iron clamp around his chest that refused to let him rest. Yet, as he pressed deeper into the wilderness, he felt the edges of his consciousness pull him back to an even greater worry, one that gnawed at him more deeply than the immediate danger of capture. He couldn't afford to be reckless, but he also couldn't simply vanish without reaching out to the one person who might still believe in his innocence, Ethan Cross. They had served together, once upon a time, a different life in a different world. Back then, trust had been a given, forged in the crucible of combat and shared purpose. Now, the entire system had branded Logan a criminal, a traitor, a murderer, and the very forces that once embraced him as a hero were out for his blood. Ethan, however, had not turned his back. At least, Logan hoped not. His thoughts churned as he navigated a steep slope littered with loose rocks. He paused when the narrow path threatened to crumble under his weight, forcing him to grip a tree root for balance. For a moment, the physical effort tore his attention away from the turmoil in his head. He managed to regain his footing and continued forward, body trembling with exhaustion. It wasn't just the relentless pace or the injuries, from bruised ribs to aching limbs. It was the crushing weight of betrayal, the knowledge that someone high up had orchestrated his downfall. He could endure pain. He had been trained to withstand hardships most men couldn't fathom. But the notion of being abandoned by the very institution he had devoted his life to serving was something else entirely. A whisper of movement caught his attention. He froze, eyes scanning the moonlit clearing ahead. Through the veil of leaves, he noticed a slight glow, faint but unmistakable. A cabin or some structure tucked away in the woods. The logical part of his mind warned him to stay clear. It could be a trap, or it could be crawling with bounty hunters already. But he had little choice. The forest stretched on for miles, and his body was approaching its limits. He crept closer, cautious with each step, heart pounding. The faint glow turned out to be the soft light of a single lantern, flickering on a rickety porch attached to a small cabin made of warped wood. It didn't appear to be guarded, nor did he see any sign of advanced surveillance. That didn't guarantee safety, but it was a better gamble than staying exposed among the trees. Drawing closer, Logan circled behind the structure, peering through a grimy window. Inside, he saw what looked like a cramped living area, a couple of chairs, a small table, and no signs of recent use. The place seemed deserted. He moved to the door, which sat slightly ajar, the hinges rusted to the point of near collapse. He pushed it gently, slipping inside with a muted scrape of old wood against the threshold. The smell was musty, thick with dust and neglect. A single lantern rested on a table, its flame guttering. The dancing shadows on the walls gave the impression that the cabin was alive, breathing in slow, ragged gasps. Logan's heartbeat quickened. No matter how many times he'd done this, sweeping an unfamiliar space, checking corners, clearing blind spots, he never allowed complacency to creep in. One mistake could end everything. Satisfied that no one was inside, he eased the door shut, letting the feeble lantern light guide him. He needed just a few minutes to think, to plan his next move, to contact Ethan if he could. His eyes flickered around the room until they settled on an outdated landline phone perched on a rickety side table. He crossed over to it, carefully lifting the receiver. No dial tone. Of course not. This cabin was probably so remote that it didn't even have a functional phone line anymore. He let out a slow exhale, forcing himself to remain calm. There might be no direct way to reach Ethan from here, but maybe there was another option. A spare battery, a broken radio, or anything else that could help him send a coded signal. His gaze settled on a dusty old backpack leaning against the wall. The flap was open, revealing the corner of what looked like a small transceiver. Hope flickered, tempered by wariness. He crouched, gently retrieving the device. The brand was old, the kind of relic used for short-range communications, possibly for hunters or hikers. Would it even work? He turned it over, prying open the battery compartment. There was a single battery inside, corroded at the terminals. It was likely beyond saving, but he refused to give in to despair just yet. If he could find a trickle of power in the device, maybe he could send a one-time burst. A risk. If the transceiver still had juice, and if he managed to find the right frequency, he could broadcast a coded message. But that message could also be intercepted by his enemies, especially if they were sweeping the airwaves. Ethan might respond, or the wrong people might. He found himself whispering under his breath, as though speaking to an old friend, or perhaps to a ghost, his voice rough with exhaustion and the faint tremor of desperation. "I can't do this alone, Cross. I need you to believe me." His thoughts drifted back to their last mission together, a memory tinged with guilt and the ache of lost camaraderie. They had parted on good terms, or so he remembered, each assigned to separate black ops. Had Cross heard the official story, the false accusations, the conviction, the stolen future, or had he suspected something was wrong from the start? Logan swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay grounded, to let that emotional surge pass before it overwhelmed his clarity. He was alive, free for the moment, and that was more than he had a few hours ago. The weight of all that had happened pressed down on him, but he couldn't crumble under it. He rummaged through the rest of the backpack, finding a few battered tools, some water purification tablets, and a small flashlight. The transceiver was by far the most valuable item, assuming he could get it to work. Stepping into a corner of the cabin away from the lantern's feeble light, he set it on the floorboards, coaxing the battery into place with tentative care. A spark, a faint crackle. Then, silence. He tried again, fiddling with the corroded contacts. Another spark, followed by the weak glow of an old LED display. His pulse quickened. Gently, he turned the frequency dial, scanning for something, anything that might be open. Static filled the tiny speaker. His heart lurched. The question wasn't just whether the device would work, but if he dared to use it. One poorly chosen signal could bring every bounty hunter, every mercenary, every black ops unit bearing down on this cabin. Yet he couldn't remain silent forever. Clearing his name required proving someone else's guilt, and he would need help for that. He exhaled slowly, the lonely hush of the forest seeping in through the cracks in the walls. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. The night was deep, and the future uncertain, but Logan had made it this far. His options were few, his allies unknown, and danger lurked behind every tree, every rustle of the underbrush. Yet despite the hardship, A flicker of determination burned within him. He had escaped. He had survived. Now he would have to face the consequences of that survival. And that meant taking a chance. Carefully, he pressed the button on the transceiver. A short, coded burst. An old, near-forgotten encryption pattern he and Ethan had devised long ago, back when trust had been easy and betrayal unthinkable, echoed through the cabin's static-laden air. It was a risk, a compromise of his location, but a necessary one. He released the button, waiting to see if there would be a response, waiting to hear if his last friend in the world would answer. The emotional weight was almost worse than the physical exhaustion. The fear that there might be no one listening on the other end, that perhaps he was truly, irrevocably, alone. In that moment, the cabin walls felt tighter, the darkness pressing in. He sat there, the transceiver humming softly in his hand, unsure if the faint static was a sign of life, or just another dead frequency in a night filled with too many ghosts. And though he remained resolved not to surrender, a pang of loneliness and doubt threatened to crack the armor he had spent years forging around his heart. Logan kept his grip tight on the transceiver, his breathing slow, controlled. The silence stretched on, the faint crackle of static, his only response. No reply? Not yet. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't allow the doubt creeping into his mind to settle. Give it time. Ethan had to be out there. The message had to have reached someone who mattered. He had taken the risk. Now he had to wait for what came next. Then, a burst of static. Faint, broken, but there. Pierce. You read? Logan's pulse quickened. The voice was distorted, but the tone, the rhythm, it was Ethan. He pressed the transmitter button, keeping his voice low. Logan here. Cross. That you? Another crackle. Then, clearer now. Yeah, heard your signal. Had to boost the frequency. You're barely coming through. Relief almost hit him, but he buried it down. There was no room for it yet. I need a way out, Logan said, keeping it simple. Can you help? A pause. Then, there's a town, 6 miles southwest of your position, Coldwater. It's small, not a lot of security presence. Find the truck stop on Route 17. I'll meet you there. Logan had never heard of Coldwater. He was operating in unfamiliar terrain, but 6 miles wasn't impossible. It was a risk. Any town meant exposure, but he couldn't stay in the forest forever. Got it, he said. I'm moving now. Logan. Ethan's voice returned, a fraction softer. They're looking. You need to be careful. Logan exhaled. Aren't I always? Static swallowed whatever Ethan might have said next. The connection was weak. He had no way of knowing if the message had gone through, but it didn't matter. He had a direction now. A destination. Logan moved fast, navigating through the dense forest with renewed focus. He stuck to the tree line, keeping his movements calculated, conserving energy for when he needed it most. The terrain worked against him. Steep inclines, hidden roots, shifting ground. But his training kept him moving efficiently. The wind carried the distant hum of helicopters, their search expanding. But they were looking in the wrong places. His detour through the cabin had thrown them off, buying him time. For now, the miles stretched on. His body ached, exhaustion creeping into his limbs. But he didn't stop. He kept his breathing steady, his pace even, his mind locked onto the mission. Reach Coldwater. Find Ethan. Keep moving. Eventually the trees began to thin, the shadows peeling away to reveal a dark, empty highway stretching toward the horizon. A faded road sign loomed in the distance. Coldwater. 2 miles. Logan crouched behind the remains of an old guardrail, scanning the road. It was quiet. Too quiet. No cars. No street lights. Just the faint glow of distant neon, flickering like a dying heartbeat in the dark. The truck stop. That had to be it. He stayed off the road, following the ditch along the shoulder, keeping himself concealed. The town itself was small. Gas stations, old motels, a few shuttered buildings. It was the kind of place people passed through without stopping, and that worked in his favor. Finally, he spotted it. A run-down truck stop, its fluorescent lights buzzing weakly against the night. A few semi-trucks were parked outside, their drivers likely asleep in their cabs. A lone diner sat at the far end of the lot, the windows glowing with dull yellow light. He slowed his approach, scanning for threats, for anything out of place. Then, a familiar figure near the edge of the parking lot, leaning against an old pickup. Ethan. Logan exhaled, rolling his shoulders before stepping into the open. Ethan's head snapped up immediately, his stance shifting, ready to move. His gaze locked onto Logan, scanning him the way a soldier assesses damage after a fight. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan pushed off the truck, his voice low. "Hell of a night, Pierce." Logan let out a breath, shaking his head. "It's not over yet." Ethan nodded. "Then let's get you the hell out of here." Without another word, Logan stepped forward, slipping into the truck as Ethan climbed in beside him. The engine rumbled to life, and as the truck rolled onto the highway, disappearing into the night, Logan knew this was just the beginning. The truck rumbled down the desolate highway, its old engine groaning beneath the weight of miles. The darkened countryside stretched out on either side, vast and endless, an expanse of nothingness where a man could disappear if he played his cards right. Logan sat in the passenger seat, his muscles tense, his mind still running at full capacity, despite the exhaustion creeping into his bones. The night had been relentless, one long sequence of survival. But he was finally sitting still, finally given a moment to breathe. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. But Logan could feel the weight of his glances, quick and assessing, like a man trying to measure how much fight was left in his passenger. They had driven nearly a mile in silence, the only sound the hum of the tires against the cracked asphalt. The quiet had once been a comfortable thing between them, back when trust was implicit and war zones were routine. But now it carried weight, too much weight. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You look like hell," Logan huffed, rolling the stiffness from his shoulders. "Feel worse?" Ethan nodded, tapping his fingers against the wheel. "You want to tell me what the hell's going on?" Logan let out a slow breath, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes before looking over at Ethan, his mind forcing itself to condense months of betrayal, accusations, and prison walls into something coherent. "I was set up," he said finally, his voice rough, the words heavier than he expected. "Someone inside, high up, framed me for something I didn't do. Court-martial was rushed. Evidence was airtight. It was too clean. They wanted me gone before I could ask the wrong questions." Ethan didn't react immediately, just kept his gaze on the road. But Logan could see the way his jaw tensed. "And what was the charge?" "Murder," Logan said flatly. "A mission went sideways. We had a target, high value, supposedly connected to an intel ring feeding classified data to foreign bidders. Orders were to neutralize if necessary." He exhaled, shaking his head. Intel was wrong. The guy wasn't a broker. He was a plant. Someone wanted him out of the way, and I was the bullet they used to do it. Ethan swore under his breath. "And they pinned it on you, sealed my fate, before I even knew what was happening," Logan muttered. "By the time I got back to base, reports had already been filed. Camera footage was altered, comms logs scrubbed. The entire thing was scripted, laid out perfectly so that no one would question it." He turned, locking eyes with Ethan. "And they were going to kill me in that prison cross. I overheard the guards. The execution wasn't scheduled, but the accident was." Ethan didn't respond for a long moment, just let the weight of the statement settle between them. Finally, he sighed, gripping the wheel tighter. "And you think you know who did it?" Logan's throat tightened. "Not yet, but I have a way to find out." Ethan glanced at him. "How?" Logan pulled in a deep breath. "There's a file. I don't know what's in it, but it's the key to this whole thing. The broker, my so-called target, had something valuable enough to get him killed, and whoever orchestrated this made damn sure that file was buried along with him." His hands curled into fists against his thighs. "But I know where to start looking." Ethan was silent again, his focus locked on the highway ahead. But Logan could see the tension in his posture, the way his old instincts had kicked in, calculating risk, analyzing threats, already preparing for the worst. It was what had always made him one of the best. Logan leaned back against the seat, watching as the distant lights of another town flickered on the horizon. "I need your help, Cross." Ethan let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You sure about that?" Logan turned to face him fully. "If I was wrong, I'd be dead already." That earned a dry chuckle from Ethan, but it was humorless, laced with something heavier. "That's the Logan Pierce I remember." He exhaled. "You're going after this, aren't you? No matter how deep this goes." "There's no other choice," Logan said simply. "They took everything. My record, my career, my freedom. I'm not going to let them take my name too." Ethan was quiet for a long moment before finally nodding. "Then we start at the beginning." But before Logan could respond, Ethan continued, his voice shifting slightly, carrying a note of warning. "You should know something, though. There's someone tracking you." Logan's muscles tensed. "I figured." Ethan shook his head. "No, Logan. Not a bounty hunter. Not some ex-merc looking to cash in. They sent a professional." Logan's stomach tightened. "Who?" Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "Dante Rourke." The name hit Logan harder than he expected. A punch straight to the gut, dragging up old memories like a tidal wave. He forced himself to stay still, to keep his expression unreadable. But Ethan was watching him closely. "You know him," Ethan said, not even asking, just stating the fact. Logan exhaled sharply, eyes dark. "I do." Ethan glanced at him. And that means we don't have much time," Logan muttered, his fingers curling into fists. Dante Rourke wasn't just a tracker. He was a ghost, a relentless predator, and if they had sent him after Logan, that meant whoever was pulling the strings wanted him taken out before he ever got close to the truth. Dante Rourke sat behind the wheel, his gloved fingers resting lightly against the leather, his breathing measured, his pulse steady. He wasn't in a rush. He never was. Unlike the impatient bounty hunters and the government-sanctioned mercenaries that had been sent after Logan Pierce, he understood the art of the hunt, and that was exactly what this was. A hunt. He had spent years perfecting it. There was no pleasure in it, no personal thrill, no reckless indulgence in the chase. It was a process, refined and sharpened to an exact science. There were men who fought to kill, and there were men who killed because they had no other choice. Dante existed somewhere outside both categories. He hunted because he was the best at it. And Logan Pierce was the kind of challenge he had been waiting for. The others had lost his trail. The prison guards, the security contractors, the bounty teams. All of them were too reactive, too sloppy, too reliant on drones and heat signatures to do the real work of tracking a man like Pierce. Logan had been trained by the best, and even after months in confinement, he hadn't lost his edge. He understood terrain, misdirection, the psychology of pursuit. But it didn't matter. Dante was better. He had been following Logan's movements since the moment of his escape, piecing together the breadcrumbs that no one else had seen. The search teams had wasted time combing the perimeter of Blackwood Federal Detention, sending out grid patrols and aerial surveillance, as if Logan would make the same mistakes as the men who had tried to escape before him. Dante had ignored all of it. He had gone back to the beginning. The moment he had been given the contract, he had studied every inch of Logan's case file. The conviction, the mission reports, the evidence. He had torn it apart line by line, looking for the inconsistencies, the signs that proved Pierce had been burned from the inside. He didn't care whether Logan was guilty or innocent. It wasn't his job to care. It was his job to end this before Logan had a chance to change the narrative. And he would. His vehicle rolled smoothly over the cracked highway pavement, the GPS coordinates glowing dimly on the console screen beside him. He had already pinpointed Logan's likely destination, Coldwater, a town barely marked on most maps. The kind of place where a man could slip through unnoticed if he had the right support. And Dante knew Logan had support. Ethan Cross, another ghost. Another man who had seen the inside of too many classified operations, too many black-budget missions that didn't officially exist. Ethan was predictable in one regard. He was loyal to those who had earned it. Logan had earned it. That meant Ethan would help, which meant Coldwater was the logical rendezvous point. Dante had arrived 3 hours before Logan ever set foot in town. He had positioned himself strategically, keeping his presence unseen, blending into the slow-moving traffic of long-haul truckers and weary travelers stopping at run-down motels. He had watched from a distance, waiting for the moment Logan would arrive, and when he finally had, it had confirmed everything. From the moment Logan stepped into that truck stop lot, shoulders squared, eyes sweeping the surroundings for threats, Dante had been watching. Logan had moved with precision, cautious but not hesitant, slipping into Ethan's truck with the kind of familiarity that told Dante exactly what he needed to know. Logan had a plan, and that meant Dante needed to be ahead of it. He didn't follow immediately. Following was what amateurs did. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, adjusting the earpiece connected to his private comm line. The encrypted channel hummed softly in his ear, waiting for his command. He spoke low, his voice smooth, controlled. Pierce is in play. A pause. Then a voice. Calm, measured, belonging to someone who wasn't surprised. His handler. Understood, the voice replied. Orders remain the same. Do not let him reach his objective. Remember, if the police grab him, he might live. Make sure that doesn't happen. Dante allowed himself a small, knowing smirk. It won't. He disconnected the line, reaching into the passenger seat where his equipment was already prepped. His weapons were clean, maintained with ritualistic care. His tracking devices, compact and discreet, were ready for deployment. He didn't need to rush. Logan had survived the first phase of his escape, but survival was not the same as winning. The difference between the two was time, and Dante Rourke always had more of it than his targets. The highway stretched out ahead of them, the headlights of Ethan's truck cutting through the dark, bouncing off the faded road signs and the occasional mile marker that signaled just how far out in the middle of nowhere they were. The town of Coldwater had faded behind them, swallowed by the vast, empty countryside, leaving nothing but open road and the uneasy silence that had settled between them. Logan sat in the passenger seat, his gaze locked on the landscape outside, his mind still turning over everything Ethan had told him. Dante Rourke. The name had sent something cold through his veins, something that had nothing to do with fear, but everything to do with calculation. Dante was a problem, not just another merc, not another bounty hunter looking to cash in on the contract hanging over Logan's head. He was precise, methodical, and worse, he was patient. Logan had spent years outmaneuvering enemies, evading pursuit in hostile territories, slipping through cracks that most men didn't even know existed. But Rourke wasn't most men, and if he was already in play, that meant Logan and Ethan were already on borrowed time. "You're quiet," Ethan muttered, his eyes still locked on the road. Logan exhaled slowly, thinking. That's never a good sign. Logan finally turned, his expression sharp. "If Rourke is after me, we don't have long before he gets ahead of us." Ethan nodded slightly, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel. "I figured as much." Logan studied him. "You knew he'd be on this before I even called, didn't you?" Ethan sighed. "Knew someone would be. I wasn't sure it'd be him. Not until I got word that a private contract had been issued before the breakout even hit official channels. That meant it was personal. Not just a recovery job, elimination." He tightened his grip on the wheel. "That's Rourke's specialty." Logan leaned back against the seat, processing. "Then, we need to stop thinking like we're running." Ethan glanced at him. "You got a plan?" "I do," Logan murmured. "We stop running and start setting the field. I need to get to that file. But if we go in blind, we're walking straight into an ambush." Ethan raised a brow. "So what? You want to turn this around?" Logan's jaw tightened. "We need to make him react. The only way to beat a tracker like Rourke is to control the path he's following. We let him think he's dictating the chase. Then we pull him into our terrain." Ethan nodded slowly, processing. "All right. But before we talk about pulling Rourke into anything, where exactly is this file? Logan's fingers curled into a fist against his knee. It was held under a secured drive at Langston Aerospace. It was supposed to be classified, but the guy they had me kill? He had access. Means he either copied it or moved it. If that's the case, there's only one place he would have sent it. Ethan didn't even have to ask. Horizon Data Vault. Logan gave a small nod. Only secure data facility capable of holding something like that without government oversight. He turned his gaze toward Ethan. You still got contacts on the inside. Ethan exhaled through his nose. One or two, not enough to waltz in, but maybe enough to get a lead on where the file's stored. Good, Logan said, because we're not getting anywhere near that place unless we know exactly what we're walking into. Ethan's jaw tensed slightly, his focus still on the road. And Rourke? Logan's lips pressed together. We make sure he's looking the wrong way when we go in. Ethan shook his head, a wry smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. You always did love a good misdirection. Logan exhaled, his gaze dark. Misdirection is the only way to survive men like him. The truck continued down the highway, disappearing into the night, while behind them, unseen and silent, Dante Rourke was already adjusting the hunt. The city lights of Lexington burned low on the horizon, a distant glow against the night sky, as Ethan pulled the truck onto a side road, cutting off the highway before they could be picked up by traffic cameras. The industrial district stretched ahead, a maze of abandoned warehouses and processing plants, remnants of businesses that had either folded or moved their operations elsewhere. It was the perfect place to disappear, but Logan knew better than to think they were in the clear. Dante Rourke was already out there, tracking them, predicting their movements, adapting with every step. The only way to stay ahead was to force him into a scenario where his usual tactics wouldn't work. Logan had no intention of being hunted any longer. Now, Rourke was going to be the one walking into an ambush. Ethan killed the engine a block away from their destination, rolling to a stop beside a rusted-out loading dock. Logan was out of the truck before the wheels had fully settled, scanning the streets, checking for movement, listening for the telltale hum of drones or the subtle shifts of men closing in. Nothing yet, but that didn't mean they were alone. Ethan stepped out, shutting the door softly before moving beside him. You sure this is where you want to set up? Logan's eyes swept the rooftops. Rourke isn't going to play this the way bounty hunters do. He won't send a team in first. He'll watch. He'll study. He'll wait until the perfect moment to strike. He turned toward Ethan. So we give him the moment he wants. Ethan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. All right, how do you want to play this? Logan moved fast, pulling a marker from his pocket and sketching out a rough plan on the hood of the truck, using the dirt-caked surface as a temporary blueprint. Rourke will be watching entry points, not exits. He'll assume we're either laying low or trying to slip out of the city before we hit Horizon Data Vault, but we won't do either. He tapped a point on the makeshift map. We move toward the river district, force him to commit resources there. Meanwhile, we loop back, his finger traced a different route, and double back into the high-rises near Steel Plaza. If we do this right, he'll think we're still moving east when we've already set up here. Ethan studied the plan, and then Logan's gaze was cold, determined. Then we end this. Ethan let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. Logan didn't smile. I'm done running, Ethan. Rourke is too dangerous to leave in play. If we don't stop him now, we'll never be more than 2 steps ahead of him. Ethan studied him for a long moment before nodding. All right, let's do this. They moved quickly. The first stage was misdirection. Ethan took the truck, looping around the main road while Logan moved on foot, taking side streets, slipping through alleys, making sure that if they were being tracked, there would be multiple signals for Rourke to follow. Logan kept his body low, his movements efficient as he worked his way through the city's skeleton, past buildings with shattered windows and iron staircases that creaked under his weight. He could feel the tension rising, the inevitability of the encounter drawing closer with each step. He had been in too many operations like this before. He knew what it felt like when a fight was about to break loose. Then, Movement ahead, a shadow shifting near the rooftops, a flicker of motion at the edge of his vision. He was already here. Logan's breath remained steady, his heartbeat a calm, calculated rhythm. Dante had found them. Perfect. He didn't look up, didn't react. Instead, he kept moving, leading the tracker exactly where he wanted him to go. He had no doubt Rourke had already mapped out his escape routes, already calculated every possible move he might make. But what Rourke didn't know was that Logan wasn't planning on escaping at all. Logan reached the abandoned office building they had chosen for the ambush, slipping inside through the side entrance, his movements silent. The building was dark, stripped of anything valuable long ago, its floors littered with broken glass and rusted metal. He could hear the faintest shifts in the air, the quiet tension of a predator waiting to make his move. He moved toward the stairwell, his boots barely making a sound against the concrete steps. He needed Rourke to follow. He needed him to believe that Logan was still running, still trying to find a way out. Then, the door to the rooftop creaked open above him. Logan's pulse remained steady, right on time. He moved fast, sprinting up the last few steps, bursting onto the rooftop just as Ethan's sniper scope zeroed in from the adjacent building. Rourke was already there. The tracker stood near the edge, his silhouette barely visible against the dim glow of the city skyline. A predator waiting for his prey to make a mistake. He hadn't drawn his weapon yet. He didn't need to. He wanted to talk first. Logan slowed his approach, his breath even, his stance loose but ready. "You took your time." Rourke tilted his head slightly. Had to be sure. His voice was smooth, calm, as if they were simply old acquaintances catching up. "You've done well, Pierce. Most men wouldn't have made it this far." Logan kept his expression unreadable. "And yet, here I am." Rourke took a measured step forward. "I could end this right now." Logan didn't flinch. "You won't." A pause, then a slow, knowing smirk. "You're right. Not yet." Then he moved. Rourke was fast, faster than Logan had anticipated. He closed the distance in a blur, his arms snapping forward, a knife glinting in the moonlight as he aimed for Logan's ribs. Logan barely sidestepped in time, twisting his body to avoid the lethal thrust before slamming his forearm against Rourke's wrist, forcing the blade away. Rourke pivoted instantly, spinning into a brutal kick aimed at Logan's knee. Logan blocked, the force sending him stumbling back a step. The two men circled each other, neither speaking now, their movements deliberate, reading each other like a chess match played at full speed. Logan feinted left, then lashed out with a strike toward Rourke's throat. Rourke caught his wrist mid-motion, twisting it downward, but Logan used the momentum, rolling with the movement and snapping his elbow toward Rourke's jaw. The impact landed. Rourke staggered back, a sharp exhale the only sign of pain. But instead of retreating, he smiled. "Good," he muttered. "Not good enough." He surged forward again, the knife flashing. Logan caught his wrist, twisting, but Rourke was already anticipating the move, shifting his weight, slamming his knee into Logan's ribs. Pain exploded through Logan's side, but he didn't hesitate. He drove his head forward in a sudden, vicious headbutt. Rourke recoiled, just enough for Logan to rip the knife from his grip and drive a kick into his chest. Rourke went over the edge. For a moment, he was just a shadow against the city skyline. Then he caught himself, one hand latching onto the ledge, his body swinging over the drop. Logan didn't wait. He turned and ran, sprinting across the rooftop, launching himself over the next gap between buildings, his breath sharp, his ribs aching. Behind him, he heard Rourke haul himself back up, heard the scrape of boots as the hunter regained his footing. Logan didn't look back. He had won the fight, but the war was far from over. He kept his pace steady, forcing himself not to push too hard, not to show the weakness pressing against his ribs, where Rourke had landed that brutal knee strike. His body screamed for rest, but he silenced it. He was still being hunted, and exhaustion was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had a head start, barely, but that wouldn't last. Rourke wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Logan moved through the city's skeleton, weaving between alleyways and side streets, keeping to the shadows, his breath steady despite the sharp ache in his chest. The rendezvous point was only a few blocks away, tucked into the industrial sector where no one asked questions, and the cameras were either broken or outdated. Ethan had the truck waiting at the edge of an abandoned construction site. Headlights off, engine idling. Logan slipped into the passenger seat, shutting the door quietly before exhaling. Ethan glanced at him, scanning for injuries. "You look like hell." Logan wiped at the blood near his temple, not sure if it was his or Rourke's. "Feel worse." Ethan put the truck into gear and pulled onto the road, taking a slow route through the city, blending into late-night traffic. His grip on the wheel was tight. "How bad?" Logan rolled his shoulder, testing his range of motion. "Ribs are bruised, probably cracked, could have been worse." He leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling. "I dropped him off a rooftop." Ethan raised a brow. "That mean he's dead?" Logan shook his head. "No, he'll be back." Ethan didn't ask how Logan knew. He just let out a long breath, nodding. "Then we move now." They weren't going to get another shot at this. Rourke had found them once, and now that he knew their general trajectory, he would close the net even tighter. If they didn't get to the file before he caught up, it was over. Horizon Data Vault wasn't a government facility. It didn't rely on uniformed guards or bureaucratic oversight. It was privately funded, privately run, and the security it had was better than most black sites. No one walked through the front doors without clearance, and no one accessed the sublevels without biometric verification. But Logan had spent months in that prison, thinking, planning, anticipating. If he had learned one thing in all those years in covert operations, it was this: security was never impenetrable. You just had to find the right crack. Ethan pulled the truck into an alley a few blocks away from the facility, killing the engine. From here on out, everything had to be done on foot. If things went sideways, there wouldn't be a quick escape. "Last chance to back out," Logan murmured as he checked the pistol at his waist. Ethan shot him a dry look. "Shut up and move." They stepped out, adjusting their stolen uniforms. Horizon's maintenance team rotated in the late hours, technicians coming and going without much scrutiny. Their stolen credentials wouldn't last long if scanned in detail, but they only needed minutes to reach the lower levels. They made their approach carefully, keeping to the employee entrance where the security was automated. A single badge scanner mounted to the steel door was all that stood between them and the interior. Logan swiped the stolen ID. A long pause. The scanner's indicator flashed yellow. Processing. Ethan's hand tensed at his side. If the light turned red, they would have seconds before the system locked them out. Logan kept his expression neutral, ready to shift into contingency mode. Then, green. The door unlocked with a quiet beep, and they slipped inside. The first corridor was what he expected. Clean, sterile, walls reinforced with steel plating that made the space feel colder than it was. The hum of server racks filled the air, stretching from the main hallway into deeper, restricted zones. No security guards, no personnel. Horizon didn't rely on human error. It relied on technology. They moved fast. The schematics they had memorized showed the vault was on sublevel 3, accessible only by internal elevators. That was their target. The elevator doors were ahead, but as expected, the panel required biometric access. The ID had gotten them this far, but it wouldn't be enough for deeper clearance. Ethan pulled out a compact multi-tool, already prying open the control panel's side access plate. Wires ran behind the interface, weaving into the system's security mainframe. Logan reached in, careful not to trigger any fail-safe alarms. If they severed the wrong connection, the entire building would lock down. 3 minutes, Ethan muttered. Logan didn't respond. His hands worked fast, isolating the relay controlling authentication processing. He rewired the connection, bypassing the verification and tricking the system into thinking it had already authenticated a valid user. The elevator dinged softly. Unlocked. They stepped inside, and Ethan pressed for sublevel 3. The descent was slow, the air inside the elevator thick with quiet tension. This was the point of no return. If anyone was monitoring their access, they would already be flagged. The doors slid open. A long, dim corridor stretched out before them, walls lined with thick server banks. At the far end, a reinforced security door stood between them and the data archives. It had no handle, no visible lock, because it wasn't meant to be breached. "All right," Ethan exhaled. "How do we crack this?" Logan knelt near the panel beside the door, pressing his hand against the steel. "We don't," Ethan frowned. "What?" Logan glanced up. "You ever seen a security system with no failsafe?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "They have a manual override." Logan nodded. "And where do you think they keep it?" Ethan let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You son of a—" "The server room. The only way to bypass a vault like this was to trigger the emergency lockdown failsafe, which meant forcing the system to think it had been compromised. When that happened, the server room's central control panel would temporarily open a bypass for clearance holders to override the system manually, which meant they had 5 minutes before Horizon's AI countermeasures isolated them completely. Ethan scanned the room numbers. Server control should be 2 doors down. They moved quickly. The door had a keycard lock. Ethan jammed the electronic override tool against the panel, forcing a quick reboot. The lock blinked twice, then clicked open. Inside, rows of servers hummed, their cooling fans a steady, low whir against the silence. Logan moved to the nearest control panel, fingers flying over the interface, searching for the failsafe trigger. There, activating security protocol override. A soft klaxon alarm began to pulse, barely audible. But it was enough. The mainframe's failover system responded, prompting a manual clearance request. Logan turned back to Ethan. "Let's move." They sprinted back to the vault door. The system was in override, waiting for authorized personnel to either reset or approve the emergency bypass. Ethan tapped a command into the interface. A long pause. Then, the reinforced locks disengaged. The door hissed open. Inside, rows of encrypted data drives stretched floor to ceiling. Logan immediately moved to the indexing console, inputting the access request they had memorized. A loading screen, a single result. There it was. Ethan exhaled. "We got it." Logan reached out, removing the small black drive from its dock. They had the proof. Now they just had to get out alive. Logan secured the drive, sliding it into his vest pocket, ensuring it was locked down tight. He exhaled slowly, his fingers flexing against the cold metal of the vault's inner panel. They had done it. Months of uncertainty, weeks of running, and the final gamble to get inside Horizon Data Vault had paid off. He should have felt relief, but he didn't, because this wasn't over. The back of his neck prickled with that deep, familiar instinct. Something was wrong. Ethan moved beside him, scanning the shelves of encrypted data, his breathing measured. "All right. We got what we came for. Let's move before—" The overhead lights flickered, the low hum of the servers shifting as if the entire facility had just taken a breath. Then the alarms howled. A deep, mechanical voice followed. "Unauthorized access detected. Facility lockdown engaged. All exits are now restricted." Logan swore under his breath. The AI had caught up. They sprinted back toward the corridor, boots hammering against the steel flooring as red emergency lights flashed along the walls, casting long, jagged shadows that made the hallways feel tighter. They had minutes, maybe less, before the entire building sealed. Ethan kept his pistol low as they cleared each section of the corridor, moving fast toward the elevator. But Logan already knew what was coming. The elevator was a dead end now. The AI wouldn't allow them to leave so easily. "We're taking the service shaft," Logan muttered, veering toward a side panel near the maintenance access door. Ethan didn't question it, falling in behind as Logan pried open the hatch, revealing a dimly lit vertical shaft with a steel ladder bolted along the wall. "You first," Ethan ordered, covering the hallway. Logan swung himself into the narrow space, grabbing the ladder rungs and moving quickly, forcing himself to ignore the deep ache still radiating from his ribs. He climbed in controlled bursts, his hands gripping tight, knowing that at any second automated security turrets could activate, filling the shaft with lead. Ethan followed, sealing the hatch behind them. They moved fast, scaling the rungs two at a time until they reached a secondary access vent just below the surface level. Logan braced himself, kicking the panel outward. It clattered onto the concrete floor beyond, revealing a dimly lit storage room filled with crates and old security gear. They hauled themselves through, moving immediately to the exit door. Ethan cracked it open slightly, scanning the outside. "We're clear." They slipped into the alley behind the facility, air cold against their overheated bodies. The night stretched ahead of them, the city still alive with distant movement, neon lights flickering against the wet pavement. Their truck was exactly where they had left it, tucked in the darkness at the edge of the abandoned lot. They had made it. They started toward it, keeping their pace steady, resisting the urge to sprint, to look desperate. But Logan felt it in his gut. That nagging feeling wouldn't leave him, the kind that had saved him more times than he could count. And then he saw it, a dark figure standing just beside the truck, waiting. Rourke! He was leaning casually against the driver's side door, arms crossed as if he had been there for hours. His expression was unreadable, but his posture spoke volumes. He had been expecting them. Logan slowed, his muscles coiling, his breath steadying as he locked eyes with the hunter. Ethan, beside him, cursed under his breath. "I really hate this guy." Rourke pushed off the truck, rolling his shoulders slightly, adjusting the gloves on his hands as he sized Logan up. His eyes flickered to the slight bulge in Logan's vest where the drive was secured. "You know," Rourke mused, his voice calm, conversational, "most people, when they break into one of the most secure data facilities in the world, they don't just walk out the front door." Logan tilted his head slightly. "Most people aren't me." A small smirk tugged at Rourke's mouth, a ghost of amusement, a flicker of anticipation. Then it was gone. "I'll give you this," Rourke continued, taking a slow step forward, cutting off their access to the truck. "I knew you'd make it out, but I also knew you'd come right back here." He gestured toward the vehicle. "Predictable." Logan's stance shifted slightly. He recognized the game being played. Rourke wasn't going to pull a weapon immediately. That wasn't how this worked. No, he wanted this fight. Ethan's hand hovered near his gun. "I could just shoot him." Rourke raised a brow. "You could." His gaze didn't even flick toward Ethan. His focus was solely on Logan. "But then, you'd miss out on all the fun." Logan exhaled, flexing his fingers. His ribs ached. His limbs were screaming for rest. But that didn't matter now, because Rourke wasn't here to talk anymore. The moment stretched, a thin line of silence hanging between them, waiting to snap. Then, Rourke moved. Logan had barely a second to react before the hunter was on him, closing the distance with lightning speed. The first strike came fast and sharp, a brutal left hook aimed for Logan's already bruised ribs. Logan twisted just in time, catching the impact along his forearm instead of his side. But the force still sent a sharp pain flaring through his body. Rourke was relentless. No wasted movement. No hesitation. He followed with a vicious knee strike toward Logan's midsection, forcing Logan to twist away. But Rourke had anticipated it. He caught Logan's shoulder, using the momentum to swing him toward the truck. Logan's back hit the metal hard, but he recovered just as fast, using the momentum to push off and drive a counterstrike toward Rourke's jaw. Rourke barely dodged, his head tilting at the last second as Logan's fist skimmed past his cheekbone. Then Rourke was inside his guard again, slamming an elbow into Logan's ribs. Pain exploded through his side. For a split second, Logan saw white, but he refused to go down. He threw a sharp uppercut, catching Rourke just under the ribs. The impact made the tracker grunt slightly, his breath hitching, but it wasn't enough to slow him down. Rourke pivoted, resetting his stance, already moving in for the next strike. Ethan had his gun raised now, but Logan threw out a hand to stop him. This wasn't Ethan's fight. This was his. Rourke smirked, wiping a small trace of blood from his mouth. "You're holding up better than I expected." Logan rolled his shoulders, ignoring the deep ache in his ribs. "You talk too much." Rourke lunged again. The fight wasn't over. Not even close. Rourke lunged again, closing the space between them with calculated speed. A sharp jab aimed at Logan's jaw. Logan barely twisted in time, dodging the first strike, but the second, a brutal knee to the midsection, landed hard. The impact sent a shock wave of pain through his already battered ribs, forcing him to stumble a half-step backward. No hesitation, no wasted movement. Rourke pressed the attack. Logan caught the next strike on his forearm, turning the momentum into a sharp counter, driving his elbow toward Rourke's ribs. It connected, solid, but Rourke barely reacted. The tracker absorbed the blow like it was expected, shifting his stance immediately and throwing a tight hook that clipped the side of Logan's temple. A white-hot flash burst through Logan's skull. His vision blurred for half a second. Half a second was all Rourke needed. He pivoted fast, stepping inside Logan's guard, grabbing his collar and twisting into a brutal throw. Logan's body hit the pavement hard. His back slammed against the ground, breath ripping from his lungs, pain tearing through his ribs. But before Rourke could capitalize, Ethan moved. Ethan had been waiting for the right moment, holding back as long as possible. But now he had a clean shot. His pistol snapped up fast, the barrel aimed squarely at Rourke's chest. Logan barely saw the shift in Rourke's expression, a flicker of something dark, something knowing. And then, just as Ethan pulled the trigger, Rourke was already moving. The shot rang out, the muzzle flash lighting up the night for a split second. But Rourke was gone. He had ducked low, faster than seemed possible, closing the distance before Ethan could fire again. His hands struck like a vice, wrenching the gun aside just as Ethan squeezed the second shot. The round missed. Rourke twisted the weapon from Ethan's grip in a single fluid motion and drove his elbow into his throat. Ethan choked, his body seizing as he stumbled backward. But Rourke didn't stop. He drove his knee into Ethan's gut, then twisted behind him, locking his arm around Ethan's throat in a chokehold so fast, so precise, that Logan barely had time to react. Ethan thrashed, gasping, his fingers clawing at Rourke's grip. Logan moved on instinct, pushing off the pavement, shoving the pain aside. He lunged, but then the sirens. A sharp, mechanical wail cut through the night, deafening, absolute. Red and blue lights flared in the distance. Horizon's private security had arrived. Logan's pulse spiked. They had no time. His mind split into two options, the weight of the moment crashing down all at once. Save Ethan, or run. He took one step forward, every instinct in his body screaming to pull Rourke off of him, to break the choke, to get Ethan back on his feet. But the distant roar of engines was growing louder. Too many. If he stayed, they were both dead. Rourke's grip tightened, choking the air from Ethan's lungs. But Ethan forced his head up, eyes locking onto Logan's, blood at the corner of his mouth, his entire body shaking as he tried to fight back. Then he rasped out a single word. Run! It wasn't a plea. It wasn't fear. It was an order. Logan's jaw clenched, his muscles coiled, his gut screamed at him to stay, to fight. But Ethan knew it too. If Logan stayed, Rourke wouldn't kill him. He'd disable him, keep him alive long enough for the security teams to arrive. And once that happened, it was over. Run. The word echoed in his head like a gunshot. Then he turned. He ran. Every part of him hated it. Every fiber of his being fought against the decision. But he ran. He sprinted into the shadows, slipping into the maze of alleys and back streets, disappearing into the night. Behind him, the sirens grew louder. The fight wasn't over, but he had just lost something more important than a battle. Logan didn't stop running. His legs burned, his ribs screamed, but he pushed through, forcing himself deeper into the maze of back alleys and deserted streets. He knew better than to stay in a straight line. He cut corners unpredictably, slipped into tight gaps between buildings, used the terrain like a ghost slipping into the night. He had spent years evading, disappearing, outmaneuvering trained killers. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about redemption. Ethan was still back there, in Rourke's grip, in Horizon's hands, and Logan had left him. The weight of that decision sat in his chest like iron, pressing against his ribs harder than any punch Rourke had landed. But Ethan had known. He had given the order. Now, it was Logan's job to make sure that order hadn't been in vain. The first step was losing pursuit. Security teams would be sweeping the area, searching for any trace of movement. His name would already be flagged across every private network tied to Horizon Data Vault. The bounty on him was still active. But clearing his name wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about getting Ethan out. If Logan didn't wipe the charges, if he didn't prove the truth, Ethan was as good as gone. Logan reached the far edge of the industrial sector, slowing his pace just enough to scan for surveillance. The streets here were quieter, the cameras older, the tech not as tightly integrated with security networks. That gave him a sliver of breathing room. He slipped into the shadows of an abandoned auto shop, pushing through the rusted-out back door, moving into the darkness. His mind was already working through his next move. He needed leverage. He needed a way in. The drive. His fingers brushed against the small, secured pocket in his vest. The encrypted black drive from Horizon. It was his one shot. Inside, the proof that he hadn't killed that broker. The data his enemies had buried. The evidence they had destroyed. Somewhere in that drive was the truth, and the names of the people who had framed him. The only problem? He couldn't decrypt it alone. He needed a hacker. A real one. Not some underground freelancer running a stolen rig in a basement. He needed someone who could break high-level encryption fast. Someone with access to military-grade back doors. There was only one person who fit the bill. Mara Quinn. Logan hadn't spoken to her in years. Not since she had burned her own career to the ground, walking away from the intelligence world before it could eat her alive. She had disappeared, gone off-grid, buried herself somewhere far away from the people who once controlled her. And Logan had no idea if she would help him. But she was the best. And right now, she was his only shot. Logan exhaled, flexing his sore hands, rolling the tension from his shoulders. He checked his watch. He had less than an hour before the city locked down entirely. His next move was clear. He had to find Mara. Because he wasn't just clearing his name anymore. He was going to war. Ethan's head throbbed. His body felt heavy, weighted by the strain of the fight, by the chokehold that had cut off his air just long enough to leave his lungs burning. His wrists ached from the zip ties biting into his skin, binding his hands behind the metal chair he was slumped in. The cold steel pressed against his spine, sharp against the bruises forming beneath his skin. He forced his eyes open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent light flooding the small, windowless room. It was sterile, impersonal, a black site, private, hidden. This wasn't a police station. Horizon had their own way of dealing with problems. The door creaked open. Footsteps, measured, unhurried. Dante Rourke. Ethan didn't react, didn't lift his head right away. No point in showing interest. He had been in situations like this before. The key to survival wasn't resistance. It was control. Not of the situation, because that was long gone, but of himself, his mind, his words, his silence. Rourke exhaled, a quiet, amused sound, before pulling up a chair across from him and sitting down. Casual, unbothered. "You made this difficult," he mused, rolling his shoulders slightly, like he was shaking off the remnants of their fight. "I thought you might actually get a shot off back there. Would have been fun." Ethan didn't take the bait. Rourke leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms against his thighs, his sharp gaze scanning Ethan's face. "You're quiet." Ethan let out a slow breath through his nose. "Thinking about how much better I am at picking friends than you are." Rourke smirked, tilting his head slightly. "You mean Pierce?" He let the name settle in the air for a moment, before shaking his head. "I hate to break it to you, but you might want to rethink that assessment. He ran, remember?" Ethan didn't flinch. He knew exactly what Rourke was doing, needling him, testing for cracks. Rourke leaned back, stretching slightly. "Don't get me wrong. It's been fun, keeping things interesting, playing the long game." He studied Ethan for a moment, like he was considering something. "Truth is, I was never supposed to let it go this far. Ethan finally lifted his head, locking eyes with him. What? Rourke smirked, resting his chin on one fist. Yeah, thought you might like that one. See, my orders were never capture. He tapped his fingers against the table, voice calm, casual. They were kill. From day one. Ethan's stomach turned, but he didn't let it show. Rourke exhaled, shaking his head slightly. But I like the chase. And Pierce, he's a challenge. Most of the guys I get sent after, they make mistakes, they panic, they break. Logan doesn't. He tilted his head. That's rare. That's fun. Ethan clenched his jaw but kept his breathing steady. But, Rourke continued, rolling his shoulders, turns out the people signing my checks aren't big fans of me playing with my food. His smirk faded slightly. I got a call right before I walked in here. They're done waiting. His voice shifted. Lower now. Final. No more chasing. No more games. This time, I put him down. The words settled between them like an unmovable weight. Final and absolute. Ethan forced himself to stay still. This was the shift. The moment everything became real. Rourke studied him carefully, watching for a reaction. When Ethan didn't give him one, he sighed and leaned back, stretching his legs slightly. But here's the thing, he said, tilting his head. I don't like loose ends. And that file you two stole? That's a loose end. Ethan didn't blink. Rourke nodded slightly, as if Ethan had confirmed something by saying nothing. You see, I could kill Logan clean. Quick, put a bullet in his head, and walk away. He tapped his fingers against the table, considering. Or I could make sure I have everything first. And that means knowing what was on that drive. Ethan remained still. Rourke's expression hardened slightly. I'm going to ask you one time, he said. Voice sharper now, the amusement finally gone. What did you take? Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. Nothing. Rourke exhaled, shaking his head slightly. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. He let the name roll off his tongue like it was an inside joke. You're smarter than this. You don't have to make it difficult. Ethan's fingers flexed subtly against the zip ties. Guess I'm not as fun as you thought. Rourke's smirk returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. All right, he murmured, standing slowly, adjusting his gloves. I can work with that. Ethan kept his expression neutral. Rourke watched him for a beat longer, then tapped on the steel door behind him. It opened immediately, 2 guards stepping inside. They were big, well-trained, the kind of men who knew how to break someone down without leaving too many lasting marks. Rourke adjusted his cuffs slightly, nodding toward them. Make him talk. Ethan clenched his jaw as the 2 guards stepped forward, but he didn't say a word, because no matter what they did, he wasn't giving up Logan. Logan moved through the city with the kind of practiced awareness that came from years of avoiding death. His ribs still ached from his fight with Rourke. His muscles burned from the relentless chase, but none of that mattered now. Pain was secondary. Ethan was in trouble, and the only way to get him out was to finish what they started. The stolen drive in his vest was his one chance to clear his name. And now it was Ethan's best shot at survival too. Rourke wouldn't hesitate. The people who had framed Logan had given the order. No more games, no more running, no more cat and mouse. Just kill him. That meant whoever was behind this was scared. And that meant the truth in this drive was bigger than he'd thought. He had to move fast. Horizon's security teams would be scanning for him. Every bounty hunter worth their price tag would be watching the streets. The city was no longer safe, but Logan knew better than to rely on the obvious escape routes. He wouldn't try to leave. Not yet. He needed Mara Quinn. That was the real gamble. Mara had been a ghost for years. She had built firewalls around herself that no one could break through. Not even the intelligence agencies she had once worked for. Logan hadn't spoken to her in nearly 5 years. Not since she burned her own career to the ground and disappeared off the grid. But she owed him, and she was the only person left who could decrypt this drive. Logan took a hard right, slipping into a narrow alley behind an old apartment block, keeping his pace steady, measured. The street ahead was quieter than the rest of the city, the kind of place where people didn't look twice at someone moving through the night. The entrance he was looking for wasn't marked. It never had been. A rundown bodega sat at the corner, The kind of store that had too much dust on its shelves and never enough customers. It was a front, always had been. Logan stepped inside, the scent of stale cigarettes and cheap liquor thick in the air. The man behind the counter barely looked up, flipping through an old newspaper, his face blank. Uninterested, Logan approached, resting his palms against the counter. "I need to see the mechanic." The man still didn't look at him. "Shop's closed." Logan exhaled, rolling his shoulders, ignoring the deep ache radiating through his body. "Tell her Logan Pierce is here." That got his attention. The man's eyes flicked up from the newspaper, sharp now, searching Logan's face. Then, without a word, he reached under the counter, pressing something. A second later, the refrigeration unit at the back of the store clicked open. Logan didn't hesitate. He moved past the rows of expired snack food and through the hidden doorway, stepping into a dimly lit back room lined with monitors, servers, and encrypted satellite rigs. Mara Quinn was exactly where he expected her to be. She was perched in front of a bank of screens, her fingers moving fast over a mechanical keyboard, green code streaming down one of her terminals. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, cut to her shoulders, but she still had that same sharp, calculated energy, like she was 3 moves ahead of the rest of the world and already bored of the game. She didn't turn as he entered. "You're supposed to be in prison," she said flatly. Logan smirked, stepping further into the room. "Yeah. Well, you always told me I was bad at staying where I was supposed to be." Mara finally glanced at him, her dark eyes scanning him, noting the bruises, the dried blood near his temple, the exhaustion buried just beneath the surface. Then she sighed, leaning back in her chair. "What do you need?" Logan pulled the black drive from his vest and placed it on the desk in front of her. "I need this decrypted. Now." Mara raised a brow, picking up the drive, turning it between her fingers. "Where'd you get this?" "Horizon Data Vault." That got her attention. Her eyes flickered with something close to surprise before she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Logan, you really know how to make people angry. They started it." Mara spun her chair toward her primary terminal, already plugging the drive into a secure interface. "You know, if this thing is tagged with any security failsafes, it could fry itself before I even get past the first layer of encryption." Logan didn't look away. "I don't have time for maybes, Mara." She rolled her eyes. "You never do." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code spilling across the screens. Logan stayed still, watching, listening for anything out of place. He wasn't naive. If Mara could find him, others could too. He wasn't going to let his guard down, not now. Mara worked fast, her brow furrowing slightly as she hit a security wall, rerouted, then bypassed it without missing a beat. The first layer dropped, then the second. Logan tensed. This was it. Mara's hands paused just slightly. "Oh, great." Logan's stomach tightened. "What?" She leaned in, eyes scanning the text now filling the screen. "Logan, this isn't just some buried evidence. This is..." She exhaled sharply. "This is bad." Logan's jaw clenched. "How bad?" Mara turned to him, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "This isn't just about you, or even the guy they framed you for killing." She tapped the screen. "They weren't just trying to hide something. They were trying to bury an entire operation. This file isn't just evidence. It's a kill list, a list of every high-value target they've marked for elimination. Black sites, operatives, asset drops." She exhaled. "And guess whose name is right at the top?" Logan didn't need to look. He already knew. Mara leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "Whoever put this together wasn't trying to just get rid of you. They were making sure you never had a chance to prove what really happened." Logan exhaled slowly, pressing his hands against the desk, his mind already adjusting, recalibrating. This was bigger than a frame job. Bigger than a personal vendetta. Someone out there had planned his execution before he had even known he was in danger. And now, Ethan was caught in the crossfire. Logan straightened, his voice steady. "Can you copy it?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, but if I break the full encryption, they'll know, and I mean immediately." Logan's pulse remained steady. "Then, do it." Mara held his gaze for a moment before exhaling sharply. You really are impossible. You know that? Logan gave a small, humorless smirk. Yeah. She turned back to the screens, fingers moving faster now, breaking deeper into the file, bypassing layers of security that no one was ever supposed to touch. Logan shifted his weight, rolling his shoulders, scanning the room. Logan exhaled, steadying himself as he let the weight of the situation settle. The drive wasn't just proof of his innocence. It wasn't just a buried secret meant to be forgotten. It was a kill list, and at the very top of it, his name. But the names didn't stop there. This wasn't just about him. Whoever had orchestrated this had been eliminating people for years. Agents, whistleblowers, anyone who knew too much. The deeper Mara dug into the files, the more the truth became clear. This wasn't just about framing Logan for a single murder. It was about tying up every loose end, which meant this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. Mara worked fast, fingers flying over her keyboard as she copied the decrypted data onto multiple drives, securing redundancies in case things went sideways. Logan stood near the doorway, rolling the tension from his shoulders, ignoring the deep ache in his ribs. His mind had already begun shifting, formulating the next move. I need this to reach someone with authority, Logan said, eyes locked onto the code streaming across the monitors. Mara didn't stop typing. Authority? The people on this list own authority. Not all of them, Logan countered. There are still people out there who want to burn this kind of corruption to the ground. We just need to find one. Mara let out a short, humorless laugh. You make that sound easy. Logan's expression didn't waver. You know someone. Mara finally turned her chair slightly, looking at him, studying him. I might. Logan crossed his arms, waiting. She sighed, shaking her head. There's a federal judge, Coleman. Not clean, no one in the system is, but not bought either. He's old school, one of those guys who actually believes in truth and law and all that idealistic nonsense. She exhaled. If anyone would take this case, it's him. Logan nodded. Then he's our guy. Mara turned back to the screen. Getting this to him won't be simple. Horizon has the best tracking tech in the world. The moment I crack the final layer, they'll know exactly where we are. Logan was already pulling on his jacket. Then we don't stay here. Mara let out a quiet breath. Of course not. Logan moved toward the desk, placing his palms flat against it. I need you to do two things. First, copy this to a secure channel and make sure it gets to Coleman. Second, vanish. When Horizon realizes what you've done, they'll send everything they have after you. Mara turned in her chair, raising an eyebrow. You're telling me how to disappear? Logan smirked slightly. Fair point. Mara scoffed, shaking her head as she grabbed an external drive and began transferring the data. You're really going after him, aren't you? Logan's expression darkened. Ethan doesn't have time. If I wait for Coleman to work through the legal system, it'll be too late. Mara gave him a look, one that said she knew exactly what he was planning. You're walking into a death trap. Logan didn't hesitate. Then I'll walk fast. Mara let out a slow breath before ejecting the drive and handing it to him. Try not to get yourself killed before this even reaches Coleman. Logan took the drive, tucking it securely into his vest. No promises. He turned toward the door, his mind already sharpening, his pulse steady. He had spent too long reacting, too long running. Now, he was going on the offensive. Dante Rourke thought he was the hunter. It was time to prove him wrong. Logan moved through the city with purpose, his steps measured, his mind locked onto a single objective. Dante Rourke. Ethan didn't have time. The legal system moved slowly. Too slowly for someone in a black site with a target on his back. Even if Judge Coleman took the case, even if Mara got the evidence to the right people, it wouldn't matter if Ethan didn't live long enough to see the verdict. That meant Logan had one move left to make. Rourke had spent weeks tracking him, hunting him, playing with him. Now, Logan was going to turn the tables. He needed Rourke to come to him, fast, alone, desperate to finish this. Because Dante Rourke didn't know how to resist the hunt. Logan kept his hood low as he moved through the dimly lit streets, scanning for the right location. He needed somewhere visible, somewhere just dangerous enough that word would spread, somewhere Rourke couldn't ignore. He spotted a run-down bar just off the industrial district, the kind of place that was half hangout for mercs, half informant breeding ground. Rourke had been watching every move he made, and if there was one thing a bounty hunter couldn't ignore, it was a target making himself known. Logan stepped inside. The bar was exactly what he expected. Low ceilings, dim lighting, the air thick with smoke and the stale scent of old liquor. There were only a handful of people inside, scattered across the room, but that didn't matter, because Logan wasn't here to blend in. He was here to be seen. He walked straight to the bar, took a seat, and when the bartender raised an eyebrow at his bruised face and battered stance, Logan simply exhaled and said, "Whiskey, and make sure everyone knows it's on me." A few heads turned at that. Good. The bartender poured the drink, setting it down in front of him, but Logan didn't drink it. He just sat there, waiting, letting the tension settle. Minutes passed. Then, finally, movement. A man at the far end of the bar, bald, lean, the kind of guy who survived in places like this because he knew how to listen. Logan didn't know him, but he didn't have to. He just needed him to do exactly what Logan knew he would. The man pulled out a phone. Logan didn't smile. He didn't move. He just waited. Because that message, it was going straight to Rourke. The words would spread fast. Logan Pierce was sitting in a bar, alone, out in the open. No disguise, no escape route, no plan to run. A challenge. A target too good to ignore. And Dante Rourke? He wouldn't resist, because Logan had finally given him what he wanted. An easy kill. Or so Rourke thought. Logan took the whiskey, finally lifting it to his lips, taking a slow sip as he let his muscles relax just enough to play the part. Then he waited for the hunter to come running. Because this time, Logan wasn't the prey. This time, he was the trap. Logan sat in the dim light of the bar, fingers loosely wrapped around the whiskey glass, his body still but his mind razor-sharp. He had chosen this place for a reason. Limited exits, no civilian interference, and just enough eyes on him to make sure word traveled fast. Dante Rourke had spent weeks chasing him. Now, Logan had given him the perfect opportunity to finish the job. The air inside the bar shifted. It was subtle. A drop in volume. A pause in movement. A tension that hadn't been there seconds before. Logan didn't turn his head, didn't give any indication that he had noticed, but he could feel it. The weight of a predator stepping into the room. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Then, a voice. "Didn't think you'd make it this easy for me." Logan finally looked up. Dante Rourke stood just inside the entrance. Casual, loose, his stance effortless. But Logan knew better. There was no casual when it came to Rourke. He was already calculating, already deciding how this would go. Logan took another sip of his drink, letting the silence stretch, letting Rourke come to him. Rourke smirked, moving closer. He was dressed the same as always, dark tactical gear, gloves that barely concealed the calluses of a man who had spent years using his hands as weapons. He stopped just a few feet away, gaze flicking over Logan's posture, his injuries, the slow rise and fall of his breath. "You look worse than the last time I saw you," Rourke mused, tilting his head slightly. "That rooftop fall really do a number on you?" Logan didn't react. He just set his glass down on the bar. "You came faster than I expected." Rourke exhaled a quiet chuckle. "Please, you knew I'd come the second you made a scene." He studied Logan carefully. "So tell me, what's the angle here? You've spent weeks running. Suddenly, you're just sitting here, waiting for me?" Logan met his gaze. "Tired of running." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that's cute. But I don't buy it." The bar was silent now. Everyone else had quietly slipped away, leaving only the bartender in the far corner, pretending not to hear anything. Logan leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, controlled. "I want Ethan back." Rourke didn't flinch. didn't even blink. Then, a smirk. "Ah," he said, sitting down on the stool next to Logan, completely at ease. "So that's what this is about." He tapped his knuckles against the bar, as if considering something. "And here I thought you just missed me." Logan didn't move. "Where is he?" Rourke exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. "You really think I'm going to just tell you?" Logan's fingers flexed against the bar top, but he kept his voice even. "You're not walking out of here unless you do." That actually made Rourke laugh. A real laugh. "Oh, Logan," he said, eyes gleaming with something dangerous. "You're talking to me like you've already won." Then he moved. Fast. Logan barely had time to react before Rourke's fist came at his jaw. Logan twisted just in time, the punch grazing his cheek instead of breaking it. But Rourke was already moving, already pressing the advantage. His other hand snapped forward, grabbing Logan's collar, pulling him into a brutal knee strike. Pain exploded through Logan's ribs, sending a sharp, breath-stealing agony through his body. But he didn't go down. Instead, he countered. Logan caught Rourke's wrist, twisting violently, yanking the other man off balance before slamming his elbow into Rourke's jaw. A solid, brutal impact. Rourke stumbled back half a step, but he was smiling. "Finally," Rourke murmured, wiping a trace of blood from his lip. "I was starting to think you lost your edge." Logan didn't answer. He just moved. The fight broke out in full force, a vicious, brutal exchange of strikes. Fast, efficient, deadly. Logan dodged a hook, twisting away before throwing a sharp kick toward Rourke's knee. Rourke caught it mid-motion, twisting sharply, forcing Logan off balance. Logan hit the ground but rolled with the impact, shoving off with his elbow and coming up swinging. His fist crashed against Rourke's ribs. Rourke retaliated immediately, snapping his own elbow into Logan's temple. Blinding pain. A ringing in his ears. But Logan didn't stop. He surged forward, tackling Rourke hard, sending them both crashing into a nearby table. The wood splintered beneath their weight. For a second, the fight paused. Rourke exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he picked himself up. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. But you're still not walking out of here in one piece." Logan wiped blood from his brow. "You're talking a lot for someone losing ground." Rourke grinned. "Oh, Logan, I'm just getting started." Then he came at him again. Logan braced himself. This wasn't just a fight. This was a war, and he wasn't leaving without answers. Logan barely had time to reset his stance before Rourke was on him again, moving like a force of nature, precise and relentless. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Every strike was measured, each one designed to break him down, inch by inch. Logan blocked a sharp elbow meant for his jaw, pivoting to deflect a follow-up knee aimed at his ribs. But Rourke was fast. Faster than Logan wanted to admit. The next hit landed. A brutal hook to Logan's ribs, exactly where he had already taken damage from their last fight. The pain flared white-hot. But Logan gritted his teeth, riding it out as he twisted, using the momentum to slam his forearm into Rourke's throat. Rourke stumbled back half a step. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Logan surged forward, closing the gap, throwing a strike at his ribs, then a sharp knee toward his midsection. Rourke blocked the first, but took the second full force. He grunted, eyes flashing with something between pain and amusement. "This is what I wanted." Rourke exhaled, shaking the impact off, rolling his shoulders. His breathing was heavier now, a real fight. Logan didn't answer. He just adjusted his stance, watching, waiting. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about finishing it. Rourke exhaled sharply, wiping the blood from his lip, and suddenly drew his gun. Logan moved before he could fire. He lunged, grabbing Rourke's wrist, wrenching it aside just as the gun discharged. The shot rang out, deafening in the small bar. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. The bartender bolted out the back without a word. Logan barely noticed. His entire focus was on the gun. Rourke fought him for control, their bodies colliding, twisting. Logan slammed his shoulder into Rourke's chest, forcing his arm upward as another shot fired into the ceiling. They crashed into a table, tipping it over, sending bottles and glasses shattering across the floor. The gun slipped from Rourke's grip. Logan didn't let up. He drove his knee into Rourke's midsection, then followed it with a sharp elbow to his jaw, a perfect hit. Rourke staggered. Logan saw his opening and took it. He pivoted, twisting into a brutal takedown, driving Rourke to the ground. Before the tracker could recover, Logan was on him, knee pressing into his chest, hands locked around his throat. "Where is he?" Logan growled. Rourke laughed. Even pinned, even bleeding, his smile didn't waver. "You're going to have to do better than that." Logan's grip tightened, pressing down hard enough to make breathing difficult. Not enough to kill, but enough to hurt. "I don't have time for this," Logan warned, his voice low, controlled. "Tell me where they're keeping Ethan." Rourke just stared up at him, his expression unreadable. "You still think you're in control here?" Logan grabbed the front of his shirt, yanking him upright before slamming him back down against the floor. The impact cracked through the silence. "Where is he?" Rourke exhaled slowly, blinking the daze from his vision. Then, with deliberate patience, he smiled. "I could give you 100 locations," he murmured. "I could send you running across the city, chasing ghosts, wasting time you don't have. And by the time you figured out I was lying," his smirk widened, "Ethan would already be dead." Logan's heart hammered. Rourke knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't about defiance. This was about control. Even now, even beaten, he still had the power to decide how this ended, unless Logan took it from him. Logan exhaled, forcing himself to pull back, his mind recalibrating. He wasn't getting answers out of Rourke. Not with words. But he didn't need them. He needed his phone. Without hesitation, Logan yanked the device from Rourke's vest, shoving him aside as he stood. Rourke actually laughed. "You really think I'm stupid enough to leave a location on there?" Logan didn't answer. He was already moving, already navigating through the interface, bypassing the biometric lock with Rourke's unconscious fingerprint. And then, there it was. A set of coordinates. Not a name, not a street address. A remote location. It was outside the city limits, buried in the kind of place where bodies disappeared and no one asked questions. A secondary black site. Logan's pulse remained steady. He had what he needed. He turned back to Rourke, who was still lying on the ground, smirking up at him despite everything. "You're too late," Rourke murmured. "You'll never make it in time." Logan didn't respond. Instead, he stepped forward and drove his fist into Rourke's temple. The impact was clean, precise, designed for one thing only: unconsciousness. Rourke's body went limp. Logan exhaled sharply, shaking the pain from his knuckles before pocketing the phone and stepping away. Rourke wasn't the priority anymore. Ethan was. And Logan wasn't going to be late. He moved swiftly, slipping into the night, keeping to the back streets as he made his way toward a stolen vehicle he had secured earlier. A generic, unmarked sedan, nothing flashy. Just another forgettable car blending into the city's clutter. Exactly what he needed. Sliding behind the wheel, he pulled out Rourke's phone again, double-checking the coordinates. The location was 50 miles outside the city, buried deep in the outskirts, in a stretch of abandoned industrial complexes where no one would hear a thing. The perfect place for a kill order to be carried out. His jaw clenched as he started the engine. Ethan was running out of time. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror as he pushed the speedometer higher. The digital map on the phone counted down the miles, leading him into the wasteland beyond the suburbs, into a place where civilization had long since dried up. As he neared the target, he slowed, switching off his headlights, letting the darkness swallow him. Approaching in daylight would have been suicide. At this hour, under the cover of night, he had a chance. He brought the car to a stop a safe distance from the facility, parking it behind the husk of a long-abandoned warehouse. He cut the engine, stepping out into the cold air, scanning the landscape. The black site loomed ahead, a low, fortified structure, surrounded by a razor-wire fence and patrolled by armed guards. Logan studied them from the shadows. 6 men outside, likely more inside, automatic rifles, bulletproof vests, tactical gear. This wasn't a mercenary outpost. This was military precision. And Ethan was inside. Logan flexed his fingers, forcing himself to steady his breathing. He didn't have backup. No reinforcements. This was on him. That was fine. He'd always worked better alone. He moved low, staying close to the tree line as he circled toward the far side of the complex, where the fence met an old, rusted utility station. A weak spot. If he could make it over, he'd have a straight shot toward the rear entrance without crossing into the main patrols. Logan retrieved a compact wire cutter from his vest and got to work. Each snip was precise, calculated, the noise minimal as he peeled back just enough space to slip through. The moment his boots hit the ground inside the perimeter, he became a ghost. He moved fast, silent, weaving between the scattered shipping containers stacked along the rear lot. The wind howled through the gaps, covering the faint sound of his footsteps. Perfect. Ahead, a lone guard stood near the back door, his rifle slung casually across his chest, his focus lax. He wasn't expecting trouble from the outside. Logan struck before the man could react. A swift step forward, a silent strike to the throat, cutting off his ability to make a sound. The man's hands flailed for his weapon, but Logan was already moving, wrapping an arm around his neck and locking in a chokehold. The struggle lasted seconds. Then the guard went limp. Logan eased him to the ground, keeping the body quiet. He retrieved the guard's keycard and sidearm before slipping through the door. Inside, the air was colder, sterile, mechanical. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit, leading deeper into the heart of the facility. Logan moved quickly, staying close to the walls, avoiding the security cameras that he already knew were watching. He needed to move fast. Before they realized he was inside, his grip tightened around the stolen pistol. Ethan was here, and Logan wasn't leaving without him. Logan moved with silent precision, the cold sterility of the facility pressing in around him as he advanced deeper into the holding block. His body coiled with tension, every nerve attuned to the smallest shift in sound. The moment he had stepped past the security doors, he knew exactly what kind of place this was. This wasn't a prison. It was a lab, a testing ground built to contain, to study, to erase people from the world without leaving a trace. And Ethan was inside. Logan kept his pistol steady as he moved past the rows of containment cells, his sharp gaze sweeping over the glass barriers, scanning the faces inside. The people in these cells weren't just prisoners. They were subjects, held for something more than interrogation. Some sat motionless, their expressions hollow, drained, their bodies slumped in exhaustion, while others stared blankly at the walls, waiting for whatever was coming next. His stomach clenched at the thought of what Horizon had been doing here, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it now. He needed to find Ethan. His boots barely made a sound against the sleek flooring as he moved past the last row of cells, his pulse steady, controlled, every movement purposeful. Then he saw him. Ethan sat at the back of a reinforced glass cell, bloodied but alive. His wrists were bound to the chair at his sides, his face bruised, a fresh cut along his jaw, but his eyes were still sharp, focused. Still Ethan. Logan exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest easing just slightly. He wasn't too late. He stepped closer, pressing his free hand to the security panel beside the door. The system required a biometric scan, a key card, and a fingerprint. That was a problem. Ethan stirred at the movement, his head lifting sluggishly. The moment his gaze locked onto Logan's, awareness sharpened in his expression. "You look terrible," Ethan muttered, voice hoarse, but still carrying that dry edge. Logan huffed, gripping the stolen keycard he had taken off the unconscious guard. "You're one to talk." Ethan smirked weakly, then winced as he shifted in his chair. "You got a plan, or are we winging it?" Logan glanced at the biometric scanner, jaw tightening. "You need a guard's print to open this." Ethan exhaled, shaking his head slightly. Then you better go get one. Logan had already turned before Ethan had finished speaking, moving back toward the fallen guards he had taken down moments before. He crouched beside the nearest one, pressing the man's unconscious hand against the scanner before swiping the keycard. A beat of silence. Then, the door hissed open. Ethan let out a breath. About time. Logan stepped inside, knife already in hand as he cut through the restraints. The second Ethan's wrists were free, Logan gripped his arm, pulling him up. Ethan swayed slightly but caught himself, rolling his shoulders, wincing at the stiffness settling into his body. "How bad?" Logan asked, scanning him quickly. Ethan smirked, flexing his fingers. "Not my worst day." Logan nodded. They didn't have time for details. "Can you move?" Ethan inhaled slowly, testing his weight on unsteady legs. "Like I've got a choice?" Logan's grip on his arm tightened for a brief second, just long enough for Ethan to understand that this wasn't just about the mission. It wasn't just about escaping. It was about making sure Ethan walked out of here alive. But before either of them could speak, a faint vibration echoed through the facility's walls, a low, distant hum. Mechanical, subtle, but unmistakable. Ethan stiffened. "That's back up," Logan finished grimly. They had wasted enough time. More guards were coming. Logan pulled Ethan's arm over his shoulder, stabilizing his weight as they moved toward the exit, every second ticking against them like a countdown. The way out wouldn't be as clean as the way in. They had to move fast. Logan moved quickly, keeping Ethan close as they navigated the sterile corridors of the black site. His pistol held low but ready, his mind calculating the best route out. The facility had been quiet when he came in, but that hum vibrating through the walls, that was about to change. They didn't have long before the entire place locked down. Ethan kept pace beside him, his breathing steady despite the obvious pain in his movements. Logan could feel the tension in his steps, the stiffness in his stance. They had worked him over. Not enough to break him, but enough to weaken him. "How many?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. "Too many if we don't move fast," Logan replied, already scanning ahead. They slipped through the same security door Logan had entered through, weaving between dimly lit corridors, sticking to the blind spots he had memorized on his way in. But the escape wouldn't be as clean as the infiltration. They had sounded the alarm, which meant the net was closing. They reached the service corridor, the long stretch leading toward the rear exit where Logan had first entered. The outer door was just ahead, but then Logan stopped. Footsteps. Close. Fast. Organized. Ethan tensed beside him, tilting his head slightly. "That's not just a patrol." "No," Logan murmured, already shifting his stance. "That's a response team." The air changed. Logan could feel it. Then, the first shot rang out. The bullet struck the wall near them, sending shards of metal skidding across the floor. Logan shoved Ethan forward, keeping himself between him and the incoming fire. "Move!" Ethan didn't argue. He ducked low, keeping pace as Logan fired a suppressive shot toward the advancing guards. 3 of them. Of heavily armed, tactical gear, not rent-a-guards. These were professionals. Logan dropped behind a storage crate, pulling Ethan into cover with him. Another burst of gunfire ripped through the air, shredding the edges of the container, forcing them lower. Ethan grimaced, rolling his shoulder. "We walking out of here? Or is this where we make a final stand?" Logan ignored the question, his mind already working through their options. They couldn't stay pinned down. The longer they waited, the more reinforcements would arrive, and soon they'd be boxed in. That left one option. Logan turned, firing a quick 3-round burst down the hall. 2 guards ducked back into cover. The third hesitated for just a second too long, and Logan didn't miss. 1 down. The second he dropped, Logan grabbed Ethan by the arm and moved. Fast. Direct. No hesitation. They sprinted toward the back exit as the remaining 2 guards recovered, gunfire chasing their heels. Logan pulled his last flashbang from his vest and threw it back without breaking stride. The explosion of white-hot light and sound ripped through the corridor. The guards' shouts echoed behind them. Disoriented, staggered, and that was all the time Logan needed. They reached the exit, the reinforced steel door exactly where he had left it, but the lock had reset. The key card wouldn't work anymore. Logan didn't slow. He pulled a stolen combat knife and jammed it deep into the electronic panel, severing the wiring with a single brutal motion. The door clicked. He slammed his shoulder into it, forcing it open. Then he grabbed Ethan and shoved him through first. The night air hit them like a wall. Cold, sharp, full of the smell of rain and earth. But there was no time to breathe it in, because they weren't free yet. The fence, the tree line, the car, still too far. And behind them, the chase had just begun. Logan didn't slow. He ran. Because if they didn't make it to that car in time, they weren't getting out at all. Logan ran. Every step sent a sharp ache through his ribs, his muscles screaming from the night's relentless brutality. But he ignored it. He had no choice. The sound of boots hammering against concrete, of distant shouts calling for lockdown procedures, of rifle bolts snapping into place. All of it told him exactly what he already knew. They were running out of time. Ethan moved beside him, keeping pace, his breathing rough but steady. Logan didn't need to look at him to know he was running on fumes. The beating, the confinement, the exhaustion, it was catching up. But Ethan wasn't slowing down. They sprinted toward the outer fence, the razor wire barrier that marked the final obstacle between them and freedom. Logan had already cut a section open when he first infiltrated. A small, nearly unnoticeable breach along the far side where the security cameras had a blind spot. If it was still clear, they had a chance. If not, they'd have to fight their way out. "Tell me you have wheels," Ethan managed between breaths. Logan didn't answer. He just kept running. The fence loomed ahead, dark and jagged against the night sky, its sharp steel coils twisting under the floodlights, still sweeping the perimeter. Logan veered toward the opening, gripping Ethan's arm as they hit the breach. No guards, no spotters, not yet. Logan shoved Ethan through first, then followed, his vest catching briefly on the jagged wire before he tore himself free. The car was exactly where he left it, just beyond the tree line, parked in the shadow of an old warehouse, its dark frame blending into the overgrowth. They just had to reach it. Then, a sharp whistle of wind. Logan knew the sound before he even heard the impact. A bullet snapped past his shoulder, slicing through the space where his head had been a second ago. Sniper. Logan grabbed Ethan and shoved him into cover behind an old shipping container. The second shot cracked against the metal, sending sparks skidding across the ground. "They're bringing out the big guns," Ethan muttered, pressing a hand to his ribs. Logan exhaled slowly, recalculating. The sniper was stationed on the far side of the facility. Their cover wouldn't last. They had seconds before the team from inside caught up. "Stay low," Logan murmured. They moved, ducking between rusted-out crates, keeping the sniper's line of sight broken as they pushed toward the car. The tree line was 20 yards away. The sniper wouldn't have a clear shot once they hit the brush. Logan reached into his vest, gripping the last smoke grenade he had left, pulled the pin, tossed it. The canister landed between them and the facility, exploding into a thick gray cloud, masking their movements, just as the sniper's third shot cracked through the air. "Go!" Logan ordered. They bolted the last stretch, sprinting into the cover of the trees. Logan threw open the driver's side door, shoving Ethan into the passenger seat before dropping into his own. The engine was already primed. He had left it running for this exact moment. He slammed the gas. The tires tore through the dirt, kicking up a trail of dust as the car shot forward, the facility shrinking in the rearview mirror. Another shot rang out, pinging off the trunk. Logan didn't let up. He gripped the wheel, adjusting the angle as they cut onto the old back road, navigating the winding path away from the site, away from the kill zone. The pursuit teams wouldn't be far behind, but he had planned for that too. The car roared down the dirt path, hitting the main road in seconds. No helicopters in the sky, no immediate vehicle pursuit. They were out. Ethan exhaled sharply, leaning back against the seat. "That," he muttered, "was way too close." Logan kept his eyes on the road. "We're not safe yet." Ethan nodded, rubbing a hand over his face. "No, but we're alive." Logan said nothing, because this wasn't over. Not until they took down the people responsible. And Logan wasn't stopping until it was done. The safe house was tucked deep in the woods, a small, unassuming cabin nestled between the trees, far from any major roads or surveillance grids. Logan had secured it years ago, a last resort hideout for moments exactly like this. Off the books. Untraceable. The car rolled to a stop just outside the cabin, the engine humming low before Logan cut the ignition. The silence that followed felt almost unnatural after the chaos of the past few hours. No gunfire, no alarms, no pursuit, just stillness. Ethan exhaled, his body sagging slightly in the passenger seat. "I forgot what quiet sounded like." Logan didn't answer immediately. His sharp gaze swept the perimeter, checking for anything out of place before he finally spoke. "Let's get inside." They moved quickly, slipping through the door, locking it behind them. The interior was bare, functional, not comfortable. A worn-out couch, a few supply crates, a secure laptop set up in the corner. Enough to last, not enough to be lived in. Ethan dropped onto the couch with a groan, running a hand over his face. "Please tell me you have coffee in this place." Logan smirked slightly. "Medical supplies first." Ethan sighed, waving a hand. "Fine. Priorities." Logan grabbed the first aid kit from a nearby crate, tossing it onto the table. Ethan was bruised, stiff, but nothing broken. That was a win. They had gotten out alive. But Logan still felt the weight in his chest. It wasn't done yet. Then, his phone vibrated. Both men went still. Logan pulled it from his pocket, glancing at the screen. A single message. "Mara, check your secure line, now." He didn't waste a second. He moved to the laptop, booting it up, fingers already moving as he accessed the encrypted call. The screen flickered. Then Mara's face appeared. She was in a dimly lit room, a cigarette perched between her fingers, her dark eyes sharper than usual. But there was something else there, too. Satisfaction. "Pierce," she greeted smoothly. "I have news." Logan leaned forward slightly. "Tell me." Mara exhaled, taking a slow drag before she spoke. "It worked." Logan's fingers curled slightly against the table. She smirked. "All charges against you? Gone. Officially dropped. The FBI got the files. They've already started making arrests. Horizon's entire operation is about to go up in flames." Ethan let out a quiet breath behind him. "No way." Mara nodded. "Every single person who played a hand in setting you up? They're being rounded up as we speak." She tilted her head slightly. "Even your old friend Rourke is about to have a real bad day. Once they match his prints to that black site, he won't have anywhere left to run." Logan exhaled slowly. It was over. The people who had put him in that cell, who had tried to erase him, who had made him a fugitive, they were done. Ethan sat back against the couch, letting out a slow, almost disbelieving laugh. "I can't believe it." Mara's smirk deepened. "Told you I was good." Logan nodded slightly, but his focus remained sharp. There was one thing left. Ethan's name. Logan said, "It's cleared too?" Mara's expression softened slightly. "Yeah. They had nothing on him to begin with, but with your charges gone, they have no reason to hold him under suspicion." Logan finally let himself breathe. It was done. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then grinned, looking at Logan. "So, now what?" Logan leaned back in his chair. "Now," he exhaled. "Now, we go home." For the first time in weeks, they were free. Logan stood at the edge of the cabin's porch, the cool morning air settling over the quiet stretch of forest. The sky was a deep shade of blue, the first streaks of dawn creeping over the horizon. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel hunted. No more running. No more being a fugitive. It was over. The door behind him creaked open. Ethan stepped outside, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee, his bruised face still carrying the remnants of their escape. But there was something else in his expression now. Relief. He handed Logan a cup, leaning against the railing. "Thought you could use this." Logan smirked, taking a sip. "You finally found the coffee, then." Ethan sighed. "You really need to stock this place better." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of birds waking in the trees. It had been a long road to this moment. Ethan exhaled slowly. So, that's it? Logan nodded. That's it. Horizon was done. The FBI had moved in, dismantling the operation piece by piece. Mara had confirmed that arrests were still being made. And with the evidence now in the hands of people who couldn't be bought, there was no coming back from this. Logan had been cleared. Ethan was free. And, for the first time in a long time, there was no fight left to win. A rusted-out truck rumbled up the dirt path leading to the cabin, kicking up a trail of dust in its wake. Logan recognized the vehicle instantly. The FBI had arrived. They had arranged this meeting through Mara. No formal arrests. Just a conversation. The truck came to a stop, and two agents stepped out. One was in his late 50s, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, moving with the posture of a man who had spent decades in law enforcement. The other was younger, more measured in his approach. Neither looked like they were here to cause trouble. The older agent, Special Agent Connolly, was the first to speak. Logan Pierce. Logan nodded. Agent. Connolly studied him carefully. You've had a busy few weeks. Logan didn't smile. That's one way to put it. The agent sighed, pulling out a folder. You know, the amount of paperwork your situation caused could bury a man. But, he glanced at Ethan. Given the circumstances, I think we can let it slide. Ethan grinned. I'll try not to lose sleep over it. Connolly let out a quiet chuckle, flipping through the file. The official stance is that you were wrongfully accused. We have enough from the Horizon files to prove it was an orchestrated cover-up, so your record remains clean. He glanced back at Logan. The people responsible, they'll be dealt with. And your bounty? He shut the folder. Officially removed. Logan exhaled. The weight of it finally lifted. Connolly studied him for a moment longer. You know, men like you don't usually get clean slates. Not after something like this. Logan met his gaze. Then I won't waste it. The agent nodded, satisfied. Good. He glanced at Ethan. You too, Cross. You're clear of any suspicion. But I don't think I need to tell you to keep a low profile for a while. Ethan smirked. I'll try not to make any headlines. Connolly shut the truck door behind him. I hope not. Good luck, gentlemen. And just like that, they were gone. The truck disappeared down the road, leaving only the morning silence behind. Logan turned to Ethan, watching as he took a slow sip of his coffee, clearly savoring the moment. Then, without a word, Logan pulled something from his jacket and tossed it to him. Ethan caught it on instinct, frowning as he examined it. A key. He looked up. What's this? Logan smirked. Your new bike. Ethan's brows shot up. No way! Logan leaned against the railing, arms crossed. You kept me alive in that mess. Figured you deserved a proper thank you. Ethan turned the key over in his palm, then let out a low whistle. You really do care, huh? Logan exhaled. Don't get sentimental. Ethan grinned, tucking the key into his pocket. Fine, but I'm taking this as proof that I'm your favorite person. Logan shook his head, but there was amusement in his eyes. The sun had fully risen now, casting golden light over the forest, stretching shadows across the ground. The weight of the past weeks still lingered, but it no longer felt suffocating. For the first time in a long time, they had won. Ethan exhaled, watching the sunrise. So, what now? Logan took one last sip of his coffee, then set the cup down. Now, he smirked. We ride. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.